Before the video starts, please leave a like and write any comment. Let's try to reach 1,000 comments and 2,000 likes. The channel has taken a hard hit recently, and I truly need your support. If everyone watching leaves one comment and one like, we can reach that goal together. And now, let's begin. My name is Duncan Morley, and this happened to me on November 12, 1994. I was a truck driver making runs across the Midwest hauling everything from fresh produce to construction materials. This story starts on a route I'd taken dozens of times, but that night everything went sideways. The dashboard clock read 10:47 p.m. as I guided my 18-wheeler down the dark ribbon of I-70 cutting through Kansas. The headlights carved a tunnel through the blackness, revealing only what lay directly ahead, a hypnotic stretch of empty asphalt that seemed to swallow itself in the distance. November had brought an early cold snap, and beyond the warmth of my cab, the temperature hovered just above freezing. I'd been on the road since dawn, having picked up a load of steel beams in Topeka bound for a construction site in Denver. The weight of the cargo made the truck run smooth despite the occasional rough patch of highway. The coffee I'd bought 3 hours ago at a gas station outside Salina sat half empty and cold in the cup holder, no longer serving its purpose. The radio played classic rock, Pink Floyd, giving way to Fleetwood Mac, then to Led Zeppelin. I hummed along to Ramble On, tapping my fingers against the worn leather of the steering wheel. Normally I enjoyed these solitary night drives. There was something peaceful about being alone with your thoughts while America slept, watching the occasional set of headlights approach and then disappear in the rearview mirror. But that night felt different. Maybe it was the unusual darkness, the moon was just a sliver, and cloud cover had rolled in, blocking most of the stars. Maybe it was the way the wind occasionally pushed against the side of the truck, making me adjust my grip on the wheel. Or maybe it was just fatigue settling into my bones after 14 hours on the road. The green highway sign for a rest area near Junction City appeared in my headlights. I'd stopped there countless times before. It was one of the better ones, with clean restrooms and vending machines that actually worked most of the time. My eyelids had grown heavy, and I knew better than to push through the drowsiness. In this business, fatigue kills as surely as alcohol. I signaled and eased the truck off the highway, the rumble of tires changing pitch as they transitioned from smooth asphalt to the slightly rougher surface of the rest area. The parking lot was nearly deserted, just an old blue Ford pickup parked near the restrooms and an empty space where a car had recently left, the pavement still damp from melted frost. I pulled into the truck section and cut the engine, leaving only the dome light illuminating the cab. The sudden silence enveloped me like a blanket. I sat for a moment, letting my ears adjust to the absence of engine noise and road vibration. In the stillness, I could hear the tick of the cooling engine and the distant hum of the highway. The air had that particular crispness that comes with late autumn, carrying the scent of dead leaves and cold earth as I climbed down from the cab. My joints protested. Too many years on the road, too many hours sitting in the same position. I stretched my arms overhead, hearing my spine pop in 3 places. The rest area was illuminated by several sodium lights that cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. Moths and other night insects swarmed around them, creating shifting shadows across the pavement. I headed toward the main building, my breath visible in small clouds that dissipated quickly in the night air. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed and flickered, making the beige walls look even more depressing. I used the restroom, then stood before the vending machine contemplating my options. I fed in $1 and selected coffee, black, no sugar. The machine gurgled and hissed, dispensing a steaming cup of liquid that smelled better than it would taste. I took my coffee outside to a concrete picnic table, sitting with my back to the building so I could face my truck and the highway beyond. The coffee scalded my tongue but did its job, forcing alertness back into my system. I watched the occasional vehicle pass on I-70, their headlights appearing and then vanishing like ghosts. After about 20 minutes, I tossed the empty cup into a nearby trash can and headed back to my rig. The cold had seeped through my jacket, and I was looking forward to the warmth of the cab. That's when I noticed him. A man stood at the edge of the parking lot where the pavement gave way to a small grassy area before dropping off into a drainage ditch. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders that strained against a red and black flannel shirt. Faded jeans and work boots completed his outfit, nothing unusual for this part of the country. His face was partly shadowed by a baseball cap, but I could see he had several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. What struck me as odd was his stillness. He wasn't smoking, wasn't on a phone, wasn't doing anything that would explain why someone would stand motionless at the edge of a rest area parking lot at nearly midnight in November. He was just watching. watching me it seemed, though it was hard to be sure in the poor lighting. I hesitated for a moment before continuing to my truck. As I approached, I called out to him, "Need a lift?" It wasn't uncommon for truckers to offer rides to stranded travelers, though I rarely did it myself. He didn't move at first, and I wondered if he'd heard me. Then he shook his head slightly. "No thanks," he replied, his voice oddly flat, devoid of any accent or distinguishing characteristics. "Just enjoying the night." I nodded and climbed up into my cab, locking the door behind me, a habit formed over years on the road. As I fired up the engine and adjusted my mirrors, I could see him in the rear view, still standing in the same spot, still watching. Something about his posture sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the November air. I pulled out of the rest area, merging back onto I-70 westbound. In my side mirror, I could see the rest area receding into the distance and him, a solitary figure under the yellow lights, growing smaller but seemingly fixed in place, watching me drive away. I turned up the radio and focused on the road ahead, telling myself it was nothing, just a local guy taking a break from whatever night shift he worked. Or maybe someone dealing with insomnia who'd driven out to clear his head. Nothing sinister about it, but as the miles accumulated beneath my wheels, I couldn't shake the image of him standing there, or the hollow sound of his voice when he declined my offer. Little did I know that the true nightmare was only just beginning, and that man, whoever he was, would soon become the focus of the most terrifying experience of my life. The further west I drove, the more the fatigue began to settle into my bones. The coffee from the rest area had worn off, and despite cranking up the radio and cracking the window to let the cold air slap at my face, I could feel my eyelids growing heavy. By the time I passed the exit for Russell, Kansas, I knew I needed to stop again. The clock on the dashboard read 12:38 a.m. I'd been driving for almost 2 hours since the Junction City rest area, and the empty highway stretched before me like an invitation to disaster. I'd heard too many stories about drivers who thought they could push through the exhaustion, only to wake up crossing the median. If they woke up at all, a green sign announced another rest area coming up in 2 miles. This one was smaller than the previous stop, just a parking lot, some toilets, and a few picnic tables. No vending machines, no attendant. The kind of place most travelers avoided after dark, preferring the well-lit safety of truck stops. But I was in no position to be choosy. I took the exit, the truck's headlights sweeping across an empty parking lot as I pulled in. No other vehicles in sight, just an isolated patch of pavement surrounded by flat Kansas farmland stretching into darkness. After parking, I shut off the engine but left the key in the accessory position so I could lower the windows slightly. The sudden silence was profound. No traffic noise, no wind, nothing but the occasional click from the cooling engine. I set my alarm for 3 hours, then climbed into the sleeper cab behind the seats. The narrow bunk wasn't comfortable by any normal standard, but after years on the road, my body had adjusted. I pulled a blanket over myself, not bothering to undress beyond kicking off my boots. The hum of the engine still echoed in my ears, a phantom sound that would follow me into sleep, a lullaby for long-haul drivers. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I first heard it. A sound so subtle it infiltrated my dreams before actually waking me, a light scratching, like fingernails on metal. In my dream it had been transformed into the sound of tree branches against a window. But as consciousness returned, I realized it was coming from outside the truck. I sat up, instantly alert, the way you can only be when awakened by something your hindbrain recognizes as wrong. The scratching sound continued, seeming to come from the back of the trailer. I reached for my flashlight in the compartment above the bunk, my hand closing around the heavy metal cylinder. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed 2:17 a.m. I'd been asleep for less than 2 hours. Pulling on my boots, I listened intently. The scratching had stopped, replaced by what sounded like metal striking metal. A distinct clink that made my stomach tighten. Someone was at my trailer. In 15 years of driving, I'd dealt with attempted cargo thefts before. Usually it was opportunistic, kids or desperately poor folks looking for something they could sell quickly. They'd try to break the seal or the lock, peek inside, and move on if the cargo wasn't easily portable. Steel beams wouldn't be attractive to your average thief, but this was different. The isolation of the rest area, the late hour, it felt deliberate. Targeted. I considered my options. I could start the truck and drive away, but if someone was actually inside the trailer now, that would be dangerous for them and potentially damaging to my cargo. I could call the police, but in rural Kansas, how long would it take them to arrive? 20 minutes? 30? By then, whoever was out there could be gone, so I did what most would consider foolish. I decided to investigate. I pulled on my jacket and gripped the flashlight firmly in my right hand. It was a heavy maglite, the kind that could double as a club if necessary. With my left hand, I quietly unlocked the door and eased it open, wincing at the slight squeak of the hinges. The cold hit me immediately, much sharper than it had been earlier. My breath fogged in front of my face as I carefully climbed down from the cab. The rest area was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of dead leaves blown across the pavement. I stood still for a moment, listening. Nothing. No more scratching, no clinking. But that didn't mean no one was there. Keeping close to the side of the trailer, I began to make my way toward the back, placing each step carefully to minimize noise. The sodium lights at the entrance to the rest area cast long shadows across the parking lot, but where I was standing, between my truck and the bathroom building, was mostly darkness. I hadn't turned on my flashlight yet, not wanting to announce my presence. My eyes had adjusted enough to navigate around the truck using the ambient light from the distant highway and the faint glow of stars now visible through breaks in the cloud cover. As I approached the rear of the trailer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The heavy padlock that secured the doors was hanging open, the shackle clearly cut. Someone had broken into my trailer. I raised the flashlight, both as a light source and a potential weapon, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trailer doors. One was slightly ajar. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've called the police. They're on their way." A lie, but a necessary one. I hoped it might scare off whoever had broken in. No response came from within the darkened trailer. Just silence. I reached forward and pulled the door open wider, shining my light inside. The beam reflected off the steel beams, creating complex patterns of light and shadow within the trailer. At first glance, nothing seemed disturbed. The load was secured exactly as I'd left it. Then my light caught something. A movement between the beams toward the front of the trailer. "I can see you in there," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the metal container. "Come out now, and we can handle this reasonably." The figure stood up slowly from where it had been crouching beside one of the larger beams. As it straightened to its full height, a chill of recognition ran through me. It was him, the man from the previous rest area. Same flannel shirt, same build, same cap shadowing his features. But now I could see his face better in the direct beam of my flashlight. His eyes reflected the light oddly, almost like an animal's, and his expression was completely blank. Not angry, not afraid, not the look of someone caught stealing, just empty, observing. A thin scar ran from the corner of his right eye down to his jaw, white against his weather-roughened skin. "What the hell are you doing in my truck?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the trailer. He didn't answer. Instead, his head tilted slightly to one side, as if he were studying an interesting specimen. Then, with deliberate slowness, he began walking toward me. Each step was measured, unhurried, his boots making a dull thud against the metal floor of the trailer. The sound seemed to reverberate through my chest. I took an involuntary step backward. "Stay back," I warned, raising the flashlight higher. "I don't want trouble, but I'll defend myself." He kept coming, his pace unchanging, his expression still vacant. 10 feet away, 8 feet, 6. "I said stop," I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. When he was about 5 feet away, his blank expression suddenly changed. His lips pulled back in what I can only describe as a grimace masquerading as a smile. Then, without warning, he lunged forward. His movement was shockingly fast after his deliberate approach. I barely had time to react as he closed the distance between us. I swung the flashlight, but he ducked under it with unnatural quickness and slammed into me with the force of a linebacker. We both tumbled backward onto the pavement. The impact knocked the air from my lungs and sent the flashlight spinning away, its beam creating wild patterns across the parking lot as it rolled. In the chaotic illumination, I caught glimpses of his face above me, still with that terrible not smile. Eyes wide and reflecting light like mirrors. His hands found my throat, fingers digging in with surprising strength. I bucked against him, trying to throw him off, but he was solid, immovable. Black spots began to dance at the edges of my vision as his grip tightened. Desperation gave me strength. I managed to get my right arm free and drove my fist into the side of his head. The impact jarred my knuckles painfully, but his grip loosened just enough for me to gasp a breath and twist sideways. We rolled across the pavement, grappling in near darkness. He was strong, unnaturally so for his build, but I had weight and desperation on my side. I landed another punch, this one connecting solidly with his jaw. His head snapped back, and I used the momentary advantage to shove him off me. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering against my ribs. He was already rising, seeming more annoyed than hurt by the blows I'd landed. I backed away, trying to keep distance between us while looking frantically for my flashlight. There, the beam had come to rest, pointing under a picnic table about 20 feet away. I didn't dare turn my back on him to retrieve it. He stood fully upright now, head once again tilted at that unnatural angle. Then, in a movement so sudden it startled me, he cracked his neck, first to one side, then the other. The sounds like gunshots in the quiet night. I kept backing up until I felt the trailer door behind me. In one quick movement, I stepped inside the trailer and slammed the door shut, fumbling with the latch mechanism to secure it as best I could with the broken lock. The metal creaked and groaned as I pressed myself against it, heart racing. I could hear nothing from outside. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing to indicate where he was or what he was doing. After a moment of indecision, I pushed away from the door and moved quickly through the trailer, navigating around the steel beams by memory and the faint light coming through the small ventilation gaps near the roof. I reached the small maintenance door at the front of the trailer that provided access from the cab and unlocked it from the inside, squeezing through the tight opening. Once in the cab, I slammed and locked all the doors, then fumbled for my phone in the center console. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it twice before managing to dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice was a stark contrast to my ragged breathing. There's a guy in my trailer, I panted. He attacked me. I'm at the rest stop off I-70 near mile marker 331. Are you injured, sir? No. Yes. I don't know. My throat hurts. He tried to strangle me. Stay on the line, sir. Help is on the way. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, eyes darting between the mirrors, expecting to see him appear at any moment. The cab felt suddenly vulnerable, the windows too large, too exposed. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound from the cooling engine made me flinch. Sir, are you still there? The dispatcher asked after what seemed like an eternity. Yes, I whispered, as if he might hear me if I spoke too loudly. Officers should be arriving within the next few minutes. Can you see the suspect? No. I locked him in the trailer, but the lock was broken. He could be out. I stared into the rearview mirror, the darkness beyond the reach of the rest area's lights seeming to pulse with menace. Minutes crawled by, each second stretching into uncomfortable infinity as I waited, straining to hear any sound over the thundering of my own heart. Finally, in the distance, I saw the blessed flash of blue and red lights approaching on the highway. The patrol car pulled into the rest area, lights still flashing but siren off. Two officers emerged, hands resting on their holstered weapons as they surveyed the scene. I unlocked my door and stepped down from the cab, raising my hands instinctively to show I wasn't a threat. Over here, I called, my voice hoarse from the assault on my throat. I'm the one who called. The officers approached cautiously, flashlights trained on me. Are you all right, sir? The taller of the two asked. Yeah. He's in there, I said, pointing to the trailer. I locked him in, but the padlock was cut. The officers nodded, drawing their weapons. Stay back, sir, the shorter one instructed. I watched as they approached the trailer, positioning themselves on either side of the doors. The taller officer reached out and pulled one door open while his partner aimed his weapon into the opening. Police! Come out with your hands up, he shouted. No response came from within. The officers exchanged glances, then the taller one shined his flashlight inside, illuminating the interior. They both peered in, moving their lights methodically across the cargo. After a moment, they looked back at me, confusion evident in their expressions. There's no one here, sir, the shorter officer said. What? I pushed past the officers, ignoring their warnings to stay back. That's impossible. I stared into the trailer, my eyes darting between the steel beams that lay exactly as they had been loaded. There was nowhere a man could hide among them. The largest gaps were maybe a foot wide, not enough to conceal an adult body. He must have escaped, the taller officer suggested, holstering his weapon. You said the lock was cut. I nodded numbly, pointing to the broken padlock hanging from the latch. It was like that when I found it. That's why I came to check. The shorter officer, his nameplate read Officer Bryson, was examining the lock with his flashlight. Clean cut, bolt cutters most likely. He looked up at me. You're sure someone was in here? You actually saw them? Yes, I exclaimed, frustration cutting through my confusion. The same guy I saw earlier at another rest area, flannel shirt, baseball cap. He attacked me right here. I pointed to the pavement where we had struggled. My flashlight should be over there somewhere. I dropped it during the fight. The taller officer, Mitchell, according to his nameplate, walked over to where I'd indicated and swept his flashlight across the ground. Got it, he said, retrieving my mag light from under the picnic table. He handed it back to me. It's still working. I took it, the familiar weight somehow comforting in my hand. Look, I said, touching my neck gingerly. He tried to strangle me. There must be marks. Officer Mitchell directed his flashlight at my throat, examining it closely. There is some redness there, he confirmed. Could be consistent with your story. It's not a story, I said through gritted teeth. It happened. I believe you encountered someone, Officer Bryson said carefully. But right now, we need to focus on the facts. The lock was cut, your cargo appears undisturbed, and the suspect is no longer here. Let's start with your statement. For the next 20 minutes, I recounted everything. The man at the first rest area, waking to the scratching sound, the confrontation, and the fight. The officers took notes, occasionally exchanging glances I couldn't interpret. And you're certain it was the same individual at both locations? Mitchell asked. Positive, I replied. Same build, same clothes, same presence. Presence? Bryson raised an eyebrow. I struggled to explain. Something off about him. The way he moved, the way he looked at me. Like he wasn't quite normal. Not normal how? Mitchell pressed. I shook my head, frustrated at my inability to articulate what had felt so wrong about the man. I don't know, just wrong. His eyes reflected light weirdly, and he was strong, stronger than he should have been. The officers exchanged another look, the kind that clearly communicated their skepticism. Look, Officer Bryson said, we'll take this seriously. We'll file a report and notify other departments along I-70 to be on the lookout for someone matching this description. But right now, there's not much more we can do. He could still be around, I argued. He couldn't have gotten far on foot. We'll search the immediate area, Mitchell assured me. But there are a lot of places someone could hide out here, especially in the dark. They advised me to continue to my destination rather than staying at the rest area. I agreed. The last thing I wanted was to spend another minute in that place. They waited while I secured my trailer as best I could with a spare chain and padlock I kept in my tool compartment, then followed me back to the highway to make sure I got safely on my way. As I merged onto I-70, my hands were still shaking on the wheel. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see the man somehow clinging to the back of my trailer. The rational part of my mind knew that was impossible, but nothing about this night had been rational. I drove straight through until dawn, stopping only when I reached a busy truck stop near the Colorado border. The place was bustling with morning activity, drivers getting breakfast, refueling, starting their day. The normality of it was almost shocking after the nightmarish quality of the previous hours. I parked among the other big rigs, drawing comfort from their presence, and went inside. The fluorescent lights and smell of coffee and bacon grounded me somewhat. I ordered the biggest breakfast on the menu and sat in a corner booth where I could watch the door and see my truck through the window. As I ate, I replayed the events in my mind. Had I imagined parts of it? The man had been real enough. My bruised knuckles and sore throat were evidence of that. But the way he'd disappeared, could he have somehow escaped the trailer before the police arrived without me seeing him? It seemed impossible. But what was the alternative? After eating, I went to the bathroom and examined my neck in the mirror. Sure enough, faint bruises were beginning to form where his fingers had dug in. I touched them gingerly, wincing at the tenderness. Back outside, I did a thorough check of my truck and trailer. The cargo was undisturbed. Nothing seemed out of place. As I was about to climb back into the cab, something caught my eye. A small piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. My stomach dropped as I reached for it. The paper was cheap, torn from a notebook, folded once. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it and read the message written in jagged, uneven letters. Next time you won't be so lucky. I spun around, scanning the parking lot frantically. Dozens of people moved between vehicles, truckers, travelers, employees. Any one of them could have left the note. Or none of them. Back in the cab, I locked the doors and sat there, the note clutched in my hand, trying to make sense of it all. How had he found me again? Had he followed me somehow? Was he watching me even now? I reached for my phone and dialed the number of my friend Glenn. He was a fellow trucker, someone who'd understand. We'd started in the business around the same time and had helped each other through various road crises over the years. Duncan? Glenn answered, his voice groggy with sleep. What time is it? Almost 8, I said, suddenly realizing I might have woken him after a late haul. Sorry if I woke you. Nah, needed to get up anyway. What's going on? You sound like hell. I told him everything, the words pouring out of me in a rush. Glenn listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I appreciated most about him. When I finished, There was a moment of silence on the line. "Jesus, Duncan," he finally said. "That's some serious shit. You report it to the police?" "Yeah, but—" I trailed off, unsure how to express my frustration with their response. "They didn't take it seriously enough," Glenn finished for me. "Typical. Look, you need to protect yourself." "You still against carrying?" Glenn had been trying to convince me to get a gun for years. I'd always resisted. Something about having a deadly weapon in my cab made me uncomfortable despite the obvious security benefits. "I'm reconsidering," I admitted. "But that's not going to help right now. I've got to get this load to Denver by noon. You want me to meet you there? I'm in Colorado Springs, could be in Denver by the time you make your delivery." The offer was tempting. Having a friendly face nearby would be a comfort. But I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. "No, I'll be fine. Once I deliver, I'm going to find a motel and crash. Haven't slept more than an hour or two." "Call me when you get there," Glenn insisted. "And Duncan, watch your back. Lot of weird people out there." After hanging up, I sat for a few more minutes, gathering my courage. The truck stop was safe, busy, well-lit, surrounded by people. But I couldn't stay there forever. I had a delivery to make, a job to finish. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, merging onto I-70 for the final stretch to Denver. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every vehicle that stayed behind me for more than a few miles became suspicious. Every driver who passed and glanced in my direction made my pulse quicken. The miles ticked by slowly, the mountains growing larger on the horizon. Normally, this was my favorite part of the route, watching the flat plains give way to the majestic peaks of the Rockies. Today, I barely noticed the scenery, too consumed with watching my mirrors and scanning each vehicle for a man in a flannel shirt. I reached the construction site in Denver just before noon. The foreman checked my paperwork, directed me where to back in, and began organizing his crew to unload the steel beams. I stayed in the cab, watching the activity through my mirrors, jumping at every unexpected sound. Once the cargo was unloaded and my paperwork signed, I drove to the nearest motel, a budget chain that catered to truckers. I checked in, paying cash rather than using my company card, a precaution that felt necessary, though I couldn't exactly explain why. The room was basic but clean. A queen bed, a small desk, a TV mounted on the wall. I locked the door, pushed a chair under the knob for good measure, and checked the bathroom and closet. Only then did I allow myself to collapse onto the bed. Despite my exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that blank expression, those oddly reflective eyes. I heard the sound of his neck cracking, felt his hands closing around my throat. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were a chaotic mix of highways that never ended, trailers with doors that wouldn't stay closed, and a figure that was always just at the edge of my vision, watching, waiting. I woke with a start several hours later, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. The digital clock on the nightstand read 5:43 p.m. Outside, the day was fading, shadows lengthening across the parking lot visible through a gap in the curtains. I sat up, rubbing my face. My throat was still sore, and new bruises had darkened on my knuckles. Physical reminders that I hadn't imagined at all. The note sat on the nightstand where I'd placed it earlier. I picked it up, reading the threatening message again. The handwriting was distinctive, almost childlike in its unevenness, yet deliberately formed. I folded it carefully and put it in my wallet. Evidence, though, of what exactly, I wasn't sure. After a quick shower, I called the local police department. The dispatcher connected me to a detective who listened patiently to my story. Unlike the officers from the night before, she seemed to take the threat seriously. "I'd like to see that note," Detective Alvarez said, "and document those bruises on your neck. Could you come in tomorrow morning?" I agreed, relieved that someone was finally showing appropriate concern. We arranged to meet at the station at 9 a.m. That evening, I ordered delivery rather than risking going out. I watched mindless TV, trying to distract myself from the questions swirling in my mind. Who was this man? What did he want from me? How had he found me at the truck stop? And most disturbing of all, how had he escaped from the locked trailer without being seen? As night fell completely, I found myself checking and rechecking the locks, peering through the curtains at every sound from the parking lot. The normal noises of a motel, doors closing, ice machines humming, distant conversations, all seemed magnified, threatening. I called Glenn again before trying to sleep just to hear a friendly voice. He offered again to drive up from Colorado Springs, but I assured him I was fine, that I had a meeting with a detective in the morning. "Good," he said. "Let the professionals handle it. But seriously, Duncan, when you get back on the road, get yourself something for protection. Doesn't have to be a gun if you're still opposed. Even a good knife is better than nothing." I promised to consider it. though the thought of having to defend myself again made my stomach turn. I'd been driving for 15 years without incident, the occasional attempted theft notwithstanding. The road had always felt like home. Now it felt like a trap, with danger potentially lurking at every rest stop, every truck stop, every delivery. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by nightmares and the constant need to check the door and windows. By morning, I felt only marginally more rested than I had the day before. The bruises on my neck had darkened overnight, now clearly visible as fingerprints against my skin. I took photos of them with my phone before getting dressed. Documentation for my meeting with Detective Alvarez. Outside, the day was crisp and clear, the kind of beautiful Colorado morning that usually lifted my spirits. Today it barely registered as I made my way to the police station, constantly checking over my shoulder, seeing threats in every shadow. Detective Veronica Alvarez was not what I expected. In my mind, detectives were either grizzled veterans nearing retirement or ambitious young hotshots with something to prove. Alvarez was neither. A woman in her mid-40s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She exuded a calm competence that immediately put me at ease. Her office was small but organized, with case files neatly stacked on one corner of her desk and a bulletin board on the wall covered with what appeared to be crime scene photos and maps. She gestured for me to take a seat, then sat across from me, notepad ready. "Mr. Morley," she began, "why don't you start from the beginning? Tell me everything that happened, even details that might seem unimportant." For the third time in 24 hours, I recounted the events, the man at the first rest area, the break-in, the attack, and the note left on my windshield. Detective Alvarez took notes throughout, occasionally asking for clarification but mostly letting me talk without interruption. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "May I see the note?" I retrieved it from my wallet and handed it to her. She examined it carefully, then placed it in a small evidence bag. "And these are the bruises?" she asked, looking at my neck. I nodded, pulling down my collar slightly to show the marks more clearly. "They're worse today than they were yesterday." She took several photos with a camera from her desk drawer. "I'd like to show you some photos, Mr. Morley. See if any of these individuals resembles the man you encountered." She opened a folder and placed 6 photographs on the desk. Mugshots of different men, all roughly matching the general description I'd given. I studied each one carefully, looking for the distinctive scar, the flat expression, anything that might trigger recognition. "No," I said finally. "None of these is him." She didn't seem surprised. "Worth a try. Now I need to ask, is there anyone who might have a reason to target you specifically? Any disputes with coworkers, road rage incidents, personal conflicts?" I shook my head. "I keep to myself mostly. Been with the same company for 12 years, good relationship with management and other drivers. No recent arguments or incidents that I can recall." "What about the cargo? Steel beams aren't typically high-value theft targets. But could there be something specific about this shipment?" Again I shook my head. "Standard construction materials, nothing special." Detective Alvarez leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the notepad. "Here's what concerns me, Mr. Morley. We've had several reports over the past few months of unusual incidents along I-70, primarily targeting commercial drivers. This was new information." "What kind of incidents?" "Break-ins mostly. A few assaults. Some thefts, though the pattern is inconsistent in terms of what's taken." She hesitated. "And a couple of disappearances." My blood ran cold. "Disappearances?" 2 drivers reported missing in the last 6 months. Both were later found, but... She paused, seemingly weighing how much to tell me. "They weren't in good shape. Dehydrated, disoriented. Neither could account for the missing time." "You think there's a connection to what happened to me?" "It's possible. The descriptions vary, but there are similarities. A man seen at rest areas, unusual strength, victims reporting a sense of unease about the individual before anything happened." She closed her notepad. "I'm not trying to frighten you, Mr. Morley, but I do want you to understand that we're taking this seriously." "What should I do?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "For now, stay vigilant, avoid isolated rest areas, especially at night. If possible, travel with a partner. And call immediately if you see this individual again or receive any more threats." She handed me her card. "My direct line is on there. Don't hesitate to use it." After leaving the police station, I felt both relieved and more anxious. Relieved that someone believed me, that I wasn't crazy or imagining things, but the information about other incidents, especially the disappearances, had added a new layer of dread to my situation. I had 3 days before my next scheduled run. A load of electronic components from Denver to Chicago. Part of me wanted to call my dispatcher and request time off, but the practical side knew I couldn't afford to. Truck payments, rent on my small apartment in Indianapolis, child support for my teenage daughter, all depended on me keeping the wheels turning. Instead, I spent those 3 days preparing. I bought a new, heavier padlock for my trailer, a dash cam for the truck, and after much internal debate, a hunting knife with a 6-inch blade. Glenn would have preferred I get a gun, but this was as far as I was willing to go. I also did some research of my own, spending hours at the Denver Public Library using their computers to search for information about incidents along I-70. Most news reports were vague. Driver assaulted at rest area. Trucker reports break-in. Nothing that specifically connected to what I'd experienced. But there was enough to suggest a pattern, just as Detective Alvarez had indicated. One article caught my attention, a feature piece from a Kansas City newspaper about the psychological toll of long-haul driving. It mentioned briefly that some drivers reported experiences that bordered on the supernatural, feelings of being watched, encountering the same stranger at different locations hundreds of miles apart, time unaccounted for during otherwise routine trips. The article dismissed these as likely results of fatigue, isolation, and the monotony of the road, perhaps combined with the use of stimulants to stay awake. A rational explanation that should have been comforting, but something about it rang false to me. What I'd experienced wasn't the product of an exhausted mind or caffeine jitters. It had been real, tangible, and terrifying. The night before I was due to pick up my next load, I had dinner with Glenn, who'd driven up from Colorado Springs as promised. We met at a steakhouse near my motel, the kind of place that catered to truckers with generous portions and minimal fuss. Glenn looked much as he always did, stocky, bearded, with calloused hands and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He'd been driving even longer than I had, having started right out of high school while I'd come to the profession later, after a failed attempt at college and a series of dead-end jobs. "You look like hell," were his first words as he slid into the booth across from me. "Thanks," I replied dryly. "Nice to see you too." He studied me for a moment, concern evident in his expression. "Seriously, Duncan, you okay?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Not really. Keep waiting for something else to happen. Jumping at shadows, not sleeping well, understandable considering." He flagged down a waitress and ordered beers for both of us. "Heard anything more from the police?" I shook my head. "Detectives looking into it. Says there've been other incidents along I-70, possibly connected." Glenn nodded, unsurprised. "Heard rumors. Drivers talk, you know. Weird shit happening out on the road. Most brush it off as exaggeration or blame it on too much no-dos. But you don't?" He shrugged. "Road's a strange place, man. Spend enough time out there alone, you see things that don't make sense. Doesn't mean they're not real." Our beers arrived, and we both took long drinks, the cold liquid a welcome distraction from the conversation's dark turn. "So what's your plan?" Glenn asked after a moment. "You still making that run to Chicago tomorrow?" "Have to. Bills don't pay themselves." He nodded, understanding the reality of our profession. "At least it's a daytime run, right? Pick up in the morning, drive through, deliver the next day." "That's the plan. No night stops if I can help it." "Smart." Glenn took another sip of his beer. "Listen, I know you don't want to hear this, but I still think you should consider carrying something stronger than a knife." I started to object, but he held up a hand. "Just listen. Whatever this guy is, he's dangerous. You said yourself he was unnaturally strong. If he comes at you again, you need to be able to stop him decisively." "I've never fired a gun in my life, Glenn. Wouldn't even know how to start." "I could teach you. Basic safety, handling, shooting. Wouldn't take long." I considered it. The thought of carrying a firearm still made me uncomfortable, but so did the memory of those hands around my throat, that inhuman strength. "Let me think about it," I conceded. "After this run, maybe." Glenn seemed satisfied with that. The conversation turned to lighter topics. Mutual friends in the business, routes we enjoyed, the rising cost of diesel, normal, everyday concerns that temporarily pushed back the shadow that had fallen across my life. After dinner, Glenn walked me back to my motel, both of us scanning the parking lot with newfound wariness. Nothing seemed out of place, just travelers coming and going, the mundane rhythm of a budget motel on a weeknight. "Call me when you reach Chicago," Glenn said as we parted. "Let me know you got there safe." "Will do," I promised. "And thanks, Glenn, for coming up, for listening. Means a lot." "What are friends for?" He clapped me on the shoulder. "Besides, you'd do the same for me." In my room, I double-checked my preparations for the morning's run. Route mapped out, paperwork ready, new dash cam charged. I set 3 alarms, not wanting to oversleep, then lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Despite my exhaustion, sleep remained elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that blank expression, those oddly reflective eyes, the memory of his hands on my throat, squeezing, cutting off my air. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were filled with endless highways, each rest area harboring a watching figure, each mile bringing me closer to something I couldn't escape. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. I showered, dressed, and checked out of the motel, then drove to the electronics manufacturer on the outskirts of Denver where I was to pick up my load. The forklift operators were efficient, and within an hour my trailer was loaded, sealed, and ready for the long haul to Chicago. As I pulled away from the loading dock, I felt a strange mix of apprehension and determination. Part of me dreaded getting back on the road, back into the vulnerable solitude of the highway, but another part was resolved to face whatever came next, to not let fear dictate my life. I merged onto I-70 eastbound, beginning the first leg of the journey. The dashcam recorded silently, its red light a small comfort, evidence gathering in case of another encounter. The day passed without incident. I stopped only for fuel and quick bathroom breaks, always choosing busy truck stops rather than isolated rest areas. By nightfall, I had crossed Kansas and was approaching Kansas City, Missouri. Following my plan to avoid night driving, I pulled into a large truck stop just east of Kansas City. The place was bustling with activity, drivers fueling up, others getting dinner at the attached restaurant, some heading to the showers or laundry facilities. Safety in numbers, I secured a spot in the truck parking area, positioning myself under one of the bright overhead lights and near several other rigs. After eating a quick dinner at the restaurant, I returned to my truck, locked myself in, and tried to get some sleep. Tomorrow would be another long day, through Missouri and Illinois to Chicago. If all went well, I'd make my delivery by late afternoon and be on my way back home to Indianapolis by evening. But as I lay in the darkness of my sleeper cab, listening to the sounds of the truck stop, engines idling, occasional voices, the distant hum of the interstate, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that somewhere out there, he was watching, waiting for his next opportunity. I clutched the hunting knife I'd purchased, taking comfort in its solid presence, and eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep. 6 months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm of long hauls and brief stops at home. The events of that November night gradually receded in my memory, though they never disappeared entirely. I had taken precautions. The dashcam became a permanent fixture in my truck. I never stopped at isolated rest areas after dark. I carried the hunting knife always, and after much deliberation and a few lessons from Glenn, a small revolver secured in a lockbox beneath my seat. Legal in most states I drove through, with the proper permits. Detective Alvarez and I spoke periodically. She had little concrete progress to report, a few more incidents along I-70 with similar characteristics, but no suspect identified, no arrests made. The case remained open but inactive, one of many unsolved mysteries of the highway. By late May, I had convinced myself it was over. Whatever had targeted me that night had moved on, found easier prey, or perhaps had been apprehended for some other crime. The night sweats and startled awakenings decreased in frequency. I stopped checking my mirrors quite so obsessively. Then came the call that changed everything. I was in my apartment in Indianapolis, enjoying a rare weekend off, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Glenn's number. "Hey man," I answered. "What's up?" The voice that replied wasn't Glenn's. It was female, tearful, panicked. "Is this Duncan? Duncan Morley?" My grip tightened on the phone. "Yes. Who is this?" "It's Melissa, Glenn's wife. Something's happened. He's missing." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Missing? What do you mean, missing?" "He was on a run to Oklahoma City. Was supposed to be back yesterday. Never showed up for delivery. His truck was found abandoned at a rest area in Missouri. His phone, wallet, everything still inside. No sign of him." Her voice broke. "The police are looking, but they don't have much to go on." The rest of the conversation passed in a blur. Details about which rest area, what the police were doing, how long he'd been gone. But one detail stood out, sending ice through my veins. "The weird thing is," Melissa said, "the truck was locked from the inside, keys still in the ignition. It's like he just vanished." After promising to help in any way I could, I hung up and immediately called Detective Alvarez. She wasn't surprised to hear from me. "I was going to call you today," she said. "We've been notified about your friend's disappearance. The circumstances are concerning." "It's him, isn't it?" I said, pacing my small living room. The same guy who attacked me. We don't know that for certain, she cautioned. But there are similarities to the other cases. I need to go there, I decided aloud. To the rest area where they found his truck. Mr. Morley, I strongly advise against that. Let the Missouri State Police handle the investigation. If there is a connection, I've done nothing for 6 months, I interrupted. Waited for something to happen. Now my best friend is missing. I can't just sit here. There was a pause on the line. If you're determined to go, at least wait until I can make some calls. Get you clearance to speak with the investigating officers. I agreed reluctantly. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I packed a bag, checked and rechecked my revolver, and waited for Detective Alvarez's call. When it finally came, she had arranged for me to meet with a Sergeant Wilson of the Missouri State Police, who was leading the investigation into Glenn's disappearance. He'll expect you tomorrow morning, she said. And Duncan? Be careful. If this is the same individual. I know, I replied. Though in truth, I didn't care about the danger. All I could think about was Glenn. What might have happened to him, whether he was still alive. The drive to Missouri was tense, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. I reached the state police barracks near the rest area by mid-morning the next day, having driven straight through. Sergeant Wilson was a balding man with a perpetual frown and eyes that had seen too much. He led me to a small conference room where Glenn's case file was spread across the table. Detective Alvarez filled me in on your experience, he said without preamble. Similar M.O. Potentially the same perpetrator. But I need to be clear. You're here as a courtesy, not to conduct your own investigation. I understand, I said. I just want to help find my friend. He nodded, seeming to accept this. The rest area where we found his truck is about 20 miles from here. Not much to see now. We've processed the scene thoroughly. But I can take you there if you think it might help jog something loose. I agreed, and soon we were in Sergeant Wilson's unmarked police cruiser heading east on I-70. The day was bright and hot, typical for June in Missouri. Traffic was moderate, mostly commercial vehicles and vacation travelers. What can you tell me about the other cases? I asked as we drove. Detective Alvarez mentioned there have been more since my incident. Wilson kept his eyes on the road. 5 confirmed cases with similar patterns. Victim reports seeing a man at a rest area, later encounters him again in an impossible way, inside a locked vehicle, appearing suddenly, that sort of thing. Most involve some kind of assault. 2 missing persons before your friend, both eventually found alive, but what? He hesitated. Not right. Dehydrated, disoriented. One hasn't spoken a word since we found him. The other can't account for the 3 days he was missing. Says it felt like minutes to him. My stomach tightened. And no leads on the perpetrator? Nothing solid. Descriptions vary, though there are common elements. Male, average to tall height, usually described as wearing flannel or work clothes. But the details that should help identify him, facial features, hair color, distinguishing marks, those change from victim to victim. We lapsed into silence as I processed this information. None of it boded well for Glenn. The rest area appeared ahead, a standard highway facility with separate parking for cars and trucks, picnic tables, vending machines, and restrooms. Yellow police tape still cordoned off one section of the truck parking area, presumably where Glenn's vehicle had been found. As we pulled in, I scanned the area, looking for, what? A figure in flannel, watching from the trees? A sign of my missing friend? There was nothing unusual, just travelers stopping for breaks, stretching their legs, walking dogs. Wilson parked near the taped-off section and turned to me. His truck was there, he said, pointing. Door locked, keys in the ignition, engine still running when the highway patrol found it. No signs of struggle inside or outside the vehicle. I stepped out of the cruiser, the summer heat hitting me immediately. Standing there looking at the empty space where Glenn's truck had been, I felt a profound sense of wrongness. This peaceful, ordinary place had swallowed my friend without a trace. Can I look around? I asked. Wilson nodded. Stay within sight. I walked the perimeter of the rest area, studying every detail. The layout was familiar, similar to countless others I'd stopped at over the years. Nothing stood out as unusual or threatening, just a place for weary travelers to pause their journeys. As I completed my circuit, returning to where Wilson waited by his car, something caught my eye. A glint of metal beneath one of the picnic tables. I bent down and picked it up, a key ring. With a small silver hammer charm dangling from it, my heart stopped. I knew that key ring. I'd teased Glenn about it years ago, a gift from his daughter when she was 8. Proud to have picked something that represented her daddy's job as a hammer driver. Her childhood misunderstanding of Haller. "Sergeant," I called, holding up the keys. "These are Glenn's." Wilson hurried over, taking the key ring and examining it. "You're sure?" "Positive. That hammer charm, his daughter gave it to him. He wouldn't go anywhere without these keys." Wilson pulled an evidence bag from his pocket and carefully placed the keys inside. "This is good, Mr. Morley. First concrete lead we've had." But I wasn't listening anymore. My attention had been drawn to something else. A figure standing at the edge of the wooded area beyond the rest area. A man in a flannel shirt and jeans, partially obscured by the trees. Without thinking, I started walking toward him. "Mr. Morley?" Wilson called behind me. "Where are you going?" I didn't answer, my focus entirely on the figure ahead. As I got closer, he stepped further back into the trees, but not before I caught a glimpse of his face. It was him, the same man from that night in November. Same build, same blank expression, same scar running down his cheek. I broke into a run, ignoring Wilson's shouts behind me. The man turned and disappeared into the woods, moving with that same unnatural quickness I remembered all too well. The rational part of my mind screamed warnings. This was foolish, dangerous, exactly what the man wanted. But rationality had no hold over me in that moment. All I could think about was Glenn, what might have happened to him, and how this man was the key. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me. Ahead, I caught occasional glimpses of flannel between the trees, always just out of reach. The woods grew denser, the light dimmer as the canopy thickened overhead. I had no idea how far I'd run, but the sounds of the highway and rest area had faded completely. All I could hear was my own labored breathing and the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath my feet. Then, suddenly, I emerged into a small clearing, and there he stood, waiting, as if he'd intended this all along. Up close, he looked both exactly as I remembered and somehow different. The scar was the same, the build, the clothing, but his features seemed to shift subtly as I stared, like a face underwater, never quite settling into a fixed appearance. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice hoarse from exertion. "What did you do to Glenn?" The man tilted his head, studying me with those oddly reflective eyes. Then, for the first time, he spoke more than a few words. "You came." His voice was as I remembered, flat, devoid of accent or emotion. "I've been waiting." "Where is my friend?" I repeated, taking a step forward despite the fear coursing through me. "Safe, for now." He gestured vaguely to his right. Others weren't so fortunate. Their fear made them unsuitable. Unsuitable for what? His lips curved in that terrible approximation of a smile. Understanding, witnessing, transformation, none of it made sense, yet it sent chills through me nonetheless. "I don't understand what you want." "Want?" He seemed to consider the word as if it were foreign. "I observe, I test, I select." Select for what? My patience was fraying, fear giving way to anger. "Where is Glenn?" Instead of answering, he moved, that same unnaturally fast movement I'd experienced before. But this time, I was ready. I jumped backward, narrowly avoiding his grasp, and pulled the revolver from the holster beneath my jacket. "Stay back," I warned, aiming at his chest. "I won't ask again. Where is Glenn?" He paused, eyeing the gun with what seemed like curiosity rather than fear. "Your friend resisted. Like you, uncommon, most surrender to terror." From somewhere behind me came a shout. Sergeant Wilson, no doubt having followed my trail through the woods. The man's head snapped up at the sound, his expression changing for the first time, showing something like annoyance. "Others come," he said. "Unfortunate, our time grows short." "You're not going anywhere," I said, tightening my grip on the gun. "Not until you tell me where Glenn is." Another shout. Closer now. The man looked past me, then back, decision forming in his eyes. "Follow," he said abruptly, turning and moving toward the far side of the clearing. "Stop," I called, but he continued walking. I found myself following, drawn by the desperate need to find Glenn, even as every instinct screamed danger. At the edge of the clearing was an old maintenance shed, barely visible among the overgrown vegetation. It might have been used by highway workers years ago, now forgotten and reclaimed by the forest. The man stopped at the rusted door, turning to look at me with those unnerving eyes. "Choose, enter alone, or lose your friend forever." Wilson's voice called again, much closer now. I had seconds to decide. "Duncan, where are you?" The man's expression remained impassive, waiting. I kept the gun trained on him as I weighed my options. Wait for Wilson and potentially lose any chance of finding Glenn? Or enter the unknown alone, possibly walking into a trap. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. "I'm coming in," I said. "But this stays pointed at you." He nodded once, then pushed open the door. The hinges groaned in protest, revealing darkness beyond. The last thing I remember was stepping through that doorway, the gun steady in my hands, my heart pounding with fear and determination. What happened inside that shed remains both crystal clear and frustratingly fragmented in my memory. Images, sensations, revelations that my mind still struggles to process. I remember light, not from any bulb or fixture, but emanating from him, from within him, as his form seemed to blur and expand. I remember Glenn, unconscious but breathing, propped against one wall. I remember the gun falling from suddenly nerveless fingers as understanding bloomed in my mind. Terrible, impossible understanding about what this being was, where it came from, what it wanted. Not human, never human, just wearing humanity like an ill-fitting costume. And then darkness. I woke in a hospital bed in Kansas City, 3 days after entering that shed. According to Sergeant Wilson, they found me and Glenn unconscious at the rest area, not in the woods where I'd followed the man, but back in the main parking area, as if we'd never left. Glenn recovered physically, though like me, his memory of what happened remains incomplete. We both carried the same mysterious marks on our wrists, 3 small puncture wounds arranged in a triangle, perfectly equilateral. The official report chalks it up to assault by an unknown assailant, possibly involving drugging that caused hallucinations and memory loss. Detective Alvarez added our case to her file, another strange incident along I-70 without resolution. But I know different. We both do, though we rarely speak of it. Some knowledge is too heavy to carry in everyday conversation, too alien to translate into ordinary words. I still drive the long hauls, still cross the country delivering goods that keep America running. I'm more cautious now, never alone if I can help it, never stopping at isolated rest areas, always watching the shadows. The dashcam records constantly. The gun rests beneath my seat. The knife stays on my belt. Small protections against something that defies protection. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, when the highway stretches empty before me, and the radio plays only static, I catch glimpses in my mirrors, a figure standing at the edge of the road, watching, not threatening, not pursuing, just observing, testing, selecting. I don't know why we were spared when others weren't. What quality made us suitable in ways those other victims weren't? I don't want to know. But I remain vigilant. Every rest stop, every delivery, every mile of open road. I watch and wait, knowing he's out there, knowing that what happened to me on November 12, 1994 was only the beginning of something much larger and stranger than I could have imagined. And whenever I drive that stretch of I-70 through Kansas, I can't help but glance in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing there under the sodium lights, watching me with those inhuman eyes, waiting for our paths to cross again. Because deep down, I know they will. I've seen enough strange things as a cop, but nothing prepared me for what happened in 2011. I'm Randall Pierce, and I've worked in law enforcement in Marlow, Oklahoma for over 18 years now. Marlow isn't a place you've likely heard of. It's quiet, where the most action we get on a normal day is a busted taillight or some rowdy teenagers tipping over a mailbox. I liked it that way, to be honest. I'm a simple guy, and the small-town vibe suited me just fine. Or at least it used to. The morning of October 17th started like any other, unremarkable in every way. The air had that distinct autumn chill, and the trees around town were turning shades of amber and crimson. I remember stopping at Mabel's Diner for breakfast, where I'd been eating the same meal. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and black coffee, every Monday for the past decade. Mabel herself, a woman in her 70s with hands weathered from years of work but a smile that could light up the darkest room, shuffled over to my booth. "Morning, Officer Pierce," she said, sliding my usual plate in front of me. "Heard it's supposed to rain later today. Might get ugly out on those back roads." I nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. "Wouldn't be the first time, Mabel. Thanks for the heads up." The diner was nearly empty, save for a couple of farmers at the counter and old Bill Johnson reading his newspaper in the corner booth. Bill had been the town's only doctor for 30 years before retiring, and now spent most mornings at Mabel's catching up on world events. He glanced up from his paper and gave me a nod. "Anything exciting happening in law enforcement today, Randall?" he asked, his voice gruff from years of cigarettes. I chuckled. "You know how it is, Bill. Another day of keeping the peace in Marlow. Might write a speeding ticket if I'm feeling adventurous." Little did I know how wrong I would be. By noon, dark clouds had rolled in, casting the town in premature twilight. I was sitting in my squad car at the edge of town, filling out paperwork from a fender bender I'd responded to earlier. The rain started, gentle at first, then a steady drumming on the roof of my vehicle. I turned on the wipers and decided to do a patrol of the outlying areas, where flash flooding sometimes became an issue during heavy downpours. As I drove down County Road 419, past fields of rain-beaten corn stalks, my radio crackled to life. Static hissed before a voice came through, not the usual dispatcher Judy who'd been manning the radio desk since I joined the force. This voice was younger, less confident. "Officer Pierce, you there?" The voice paused, uncertain. "This is Jenny at dispatch." I picked up the receiver. "This is Pierce." "Go ahead, Jenny. You need to check out Black Creek Road. We've had multiple reports of something weird out there. Animal attacks, but no one's sure what it is." The way her voice trembled made me sit up straighter. Jenny was new, only been with us a few months, but she wasn't the type to sound rattled over nothing. "Any details on these attacks, livestock or—" I left the question hanging. The caller was pretty shaken up. Said his brother was attacked while they were hunting. "It's the Davidson family out at the Old Creek property." My stomach tightened. The Davidsons were level-headed people, not prone to exaggeration. Robert Davidson had been on the volunteer fire department with me years back. Solid guy, former military. "Tell them I'm on my way. ETA 15 minutes. I flipped on my sirens and pushed the accelerator down, tires splashing through puddles as rain pounded harder against the windshield. The wipers struggled to keep up, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Black Creek Road was aptly named, a narrow strip of asphalt that wound through one of the darkest stretches of forest in the county. The trees seemed to lean inward here, creating a natural tunnel that blocked what little daylight remained. As I turned onto the road, my headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the falling rain in eerie, dancing patterns. I'd driven this road hundreds of times before, but today it felt different. Something pressed against my consciousness, a heaviness in the air that made my heart beat a little faster. I'd felt this way before, back when I was deployed overseas, moments before our unit came under fire. It was the feeling of being watched, of something waiting. About 3 miles down, my headlights caught something by the roadside. A beat-up red pickup truck parked haphazardly, its driver's door hanging open. 3 figures huddled beside it, their shapes indistinct through the rain. I pulled up behind the truck and switched on my spotlight, illuminating the scene in harsh white light. As I stepped out into the downpour, the wind picked up, driving the rain sideways, soaking through my uniform in seconds. I approached cautiously, one hand resting on my holster out of habit. "Robert," I called out, recognizing the older man despite the years that had passed since we'd worked together. "It's Officer Pierce, what's going on?" Robert Davidson turned to face me. In the harsh glare of the spotlight, his face looked hollow, his eyes wide and haunted. Beside him stood his son Michael, a young man I'd watched grow up, now in his early 20s. The third figure was a woman I didn't immediately recognize. Michael's wife, perhaps. "Randall," Robert said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Thank God you're here. Kevin's dead." The bluntness of his statement hit me like a physical blow. Kevin was Robert's younger son, just 19 years old. I'd seen him around town, a quiet kid who worked at the hardware store and kept to himself. "What happened?" I asked, moving closer. Michael stepped forward. Even through the rain, I could see his hands were covered in dark stains. Blood, washed pink by the rain, but unmistakable. His clothes were torn, mud-caked, and his face bore a long scratch down one cheek. "We were hunting," he said, voice cracking, "just like we always do." Then something came out of the woods. "It wasn't normal, Officer Pierce. It wasn't." He trailed off, looking back toward the tree line as if expecting to see something emerge from the darkness. The woman beside him, I now recognized her as Michael's wife, Anna, placed a steadying hand on his arm. "Where is Kevin now?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Robert pointed toward a narrow path leading into the forest. "Back there, quarter-mile in. We couldn't bring him out, not after what that thing did to him." The rain seemed to grow colder against my skin as I processed his words. I'd dealt with hunting accidents before, mishaps with firearms, falls from tree stands, but something in the Davidsons' expressions told me this was different. This was something that didn't fit into the orderly world of small-town police work. I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Pierce. I'm at Black Creek Road with the Davidsons. I need backup and an ambulance." I hesitated before adding, "Possible fatality. Reported animal attack." Jenny's voice came back immediately. "Copy that. Sending Officers Keller and Walsh your way." Ambulance dispatched. I turned back to the family. I need to see him. Wait here for backup. Robert shook his head. You're not going in there alone, Randall. Whatever it is might still be out there. I looked at him, at the genuine fear in his eyes, and nodded. All right. You lead the way. Michael, Anna, you stay with the vehicles. Michael started to protest, but his father silenced him with a look. Do as he says, son. You've seen enough today. I grabbed my flashlight from the car, a heavy-duty maglite that could double as a weapon if needed, and followed Robert toward the forest path. As we stepped beneath the canopy of trees, the rain lessened, but the darkness deepened. The beam of my flashlight seemed swallowed by it, illuminating only a few feet ahead at a time. Tell me exactly what happened, I said, scanning the surrounding trees with growing unease. Robert's voice was low as we walked. We separated to cover more ground. Kevin went east toward the creek. Michael and I were about 100 yards apart, moving parallel. Then we heard him scream. He paused, and I could hear his breathing grow ragged. By the time we got to him, something was already there, standing over him. It ran when it saw us, but Kevin, it was too late. What did it look like, this animal? Robert stopped walking and turned to me, his face ghostly in the flashlight beam. That's just it, Randall. I've hunted these woods for 40 years. I know every creature that lives here. This wasn't like anything I've ever seen. A sound cut through the forest then. A distant crack, like a branch breaking under significant weight. Robert froze, his hand gripping my arm with surprising strength. It's still here, he whispered. I told you, it's still here. The forest surrounding us seemed to hold its breath. I strained my ears, listening for any further sounds of movement, but there was only the gentle patter of raindrops on leaves and the distant rumble of thunder. I kept my flashlight beam moving, sweeping across the trees ahead, illuminating nothing but wet bark and dripping foliage. Let's keep moving, I said quietly. But stay alert. Robert nodded, his face tight with tension. We continued down the muddy path, every step deliberate. The ground was soft underfoot, and I noticed tracks in the mud, boot prints, presumably from the Davidsons when they'd fled earlier. But there were other impressions too, larger and oddly shaped. I crouched down, directing my light at one particularly clear print. It was deep, suggesting considerable weight, and measured at least 12 inches across. The shape was wrong for a bear. Too elongated, with what appeared to be 5 distinct toe impressions and deep gouges at the front, as if from claws. I'd seen mountain lion tracks before, but these were 3 times the size and differently shaped. Have you ever seen tracks like these? I asked Robert. He shook his head. Never. And look at the spacing. He pointed to another print several feet away. Whatever made these was taking massive strides, moving fast. I stood up, an unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. The rain continued to fall, already beginning to wash away the details of the prints. Soon they'd be gone entirely, leaving us with one less piece of evidence. We pushed deeper into the forest, the path narrowing as vegetation closed in around us. The trees here were old, their trunks massive and gnarled, branches twisting overhead to form a canopy that blocked most of the sky. Even in daylight, this part of the woods would be dim. In the storm, it was like walking through ink. The smell hit me first. A powerful metallic odor that cut through the petrichor of wet earth and vegetation. The distinctive scent of blood, lots of it, mixed with something else, something musky and animal that made my nostrils flare with instinctive revulsion. Robert stopped walking. Just ahead, he said hoarsely, in that clearing. I stepped past him, flashlight raised, moving cautiously into an opening among the trees. The beam caught something on the ground about 20 feet away. A dark shape sprawled across the forest floor. I approached slowly, the details becoming clearer with each step. Kevin Davidson lay on his back, or what remained of him. His hunting gear was in tatters, the orange safety vest torn to ribbons and soaked crimson. His chest, his chest was simply gone, a massive cavity where vital organs should have been. Ribs protruded at unnatural angles like broken fingers reaching upward. His throat had been torn out, and his face was barely recognizable as human. In 18 years of law enforcement, I'd seen car wrecks, domestic violence gone horribly wrong, even a suicide by shotgun once. But nothing had prepared me for this level of devastation to a human body. I felt bile rise in my throat and had to turn away momentarily, taking deep breaths of the rain-soaked air. Jesus, I whispered, more to myself than to Robert. I looked back at him. He stood at the edge of the clearing, unable or unwilling to approach further. His face was ashen, his eyes fixed on his son's remains. I forced myself to turn back to the body, to observe professionally rather than react emotionally. This wasn't just about documenting a tragedy anymore. This was about understanding what we were dealing with. Because whatever had done this wasn't just a hungry predator. The violence here spoke of something else entirely. The ground around Kevin's body told its own story. Deep furrows had been gouged into the earth, and spatters of blood painted nearby tree trunks and undergrowth. There had been a struggle, but a brief one. The attack had been overwhelming in its ferocity. I crouched beside the body, careful not to disturb anything, and examined the wounds more closely. The edges were ragged, suggestive of teeth rather than claws, though there were deep claw marks as well, particularly across his legs and arms. Some of the larger wounds showed evidence that tissue had been removed, consumed. "Did you touch anything when you found him?" I asked Robert, keeping my voice steady with effort. "No," he replied. "We knew he was gone right away. We just ran." I nodded, standing up again. I needed to secure the scene until backup arrived, but a growing sense of unease told me we shouldn't stay here any longer than necessary. Whatever had killed Kevin might still be nearby, perhaps watching us at this very moment. I scanned the trees surrounding the clearing, my flashlight beam cutting through the gaps between trunks and branches. Nothing moved except raindrops and leaves stirred by the wind. But the feeling of being observed, of being hunted, intensified. "We should go back," I said to Robert. "Let the others know what we've found and wait for backup." "Shouldn't someone stay with him?" Robert asked, his voice breaking. "Not tonight," I replied firmly. "Not until we know what we're dealing with. We'll come back with more officers and proper equipment." We started back down the path, moving more quickly now. The rain had intensified again, drumming against the canopy overhead. Visibility was poor, my flashlight creating more shadows than illumination. Every few steps I would pause, listening, the hairs on my arms standing on end despite the rational part of my brain telling me this was just a tragic animal attack. We were about halfway back to the road when Robert suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. I nearly bumped into him, catching myself at the last moment. "What is it?" I whispered, instinctively lowering my light. Robert didn't speak, just raised his hand slowly and pointed to our right, into the dense undergrowth that flanked the path. I followed his gesture, directing my beam where he indicated. At first I saw nothing, just wet leaves and tangled branches. Then a slight movement caught my eye, a shifting of shadows that didn't match the pattern of rainfall. I adjusted my flashlight, focusing the beam. 2 reflective points shone back at me from about 30 yards away, set high above the ground. Eye shine, like you'd see from a nocturnal animal, but wrong somehow. Too high up to be a coyote or even a bear standing on its hind legs. And the color was off, not the yellow-green of most predators, but a dull reddish glow that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. As I watched, the points moved, shifting position slightly. Whatever we were looking at was adjusting its stance, watching us. A low sound reached my ears then, barely audible above the rain, a rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath my feet. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before, not a wolf or a mountain lion or a bear. It was deeper, almost subsonic, and utterly alien. "Run," I said quietly to Robert, not taking my eyes off those glowing points. "Now. Go." We turned and sprinted down the path, feet slipping in the mud, branches whipping at our faces. I could hear Robert's labored breathing beside me, the desperate gasps of a man beyond his physical prime pushing himself to the limit. Behind us came the sound of pursuit, heavy, rapid footfalls and the cracking of vegetation being pushed aside by something large moving at speed. The distance to the road seemed to stretch impossibly. My lungs burned, and my heart hammered against my ribs. The rain lashed at my face, nearly blinding me, but I didn't dare slow down. The sounds behind us grew closer with each passing second. Finally, the trees thinned, and I could see the glow of headlights through the curtain of rain. My cruiser and the Davidson's pickup still waiting where we'd left them. Michael and Anna stood beneath a large umbrella, anxiously peering into the forest. "Get in the truck," I shouted as we burst from the tree line. "Now, all of you!" Michael's eyes widened as he saw us running, saw the panic on our faces. He grabbed Anna by the arm and pulled her toward the truck. Robert stumbled, nearly falling, and I caught his arm, dragging him forward the last few yards to the vehicles. I risked a glance behind us just as something massive emerged from the forest edge. In the combined glare of the headlights and through the curtain of rain, I caught only a partial glimpse, a hulking shape, bipedal but hunched, with abnormally long arms that nearly touched the ground. Its body seemed covered in dark, matted fur, sodden from the rain. But it was the face that seized my attention in that split-second look. Elongated, almost canine, but with proportions all wrong. Jaws too large, teeth gleaming wetly in the artificial light. The creature paused at the edge of the tree line, as if reluctant to fully expose itself. It swayed slightly, head tilted, studying us with those dull red eyes. Then it opened its jaws and let out that sound again, the deep, vibrating growl that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my chest. I reached my cruiser and yanked the door open, simultaneously drawing my sidearm.
"Get in!" I shouted to the Davidsons who were piling into their pickup. "Start the engine and follow me."
I didn't wait to see if they complied. I threw myself behind the steering wheel, started the engine, and threw the transmission into drive. The tires spun in the mud for a heart-stopping moment before finding purchase. I accelerated hard, the cruiser fishtailing on the wet asphalt. In my rearview mirror, I saw the Davidson's truck pull out behind me, headlights bouncing wildly as it hit the uneven road surface. And beyond that, at the edge of visibility, a dark shape moved with shocking speed, pursuing us for several yards before stopping abruptly as we picked up speed. We drove in silence for several minutes, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes constantly checking the mirror. The road twisted through the forest for another 2 miles before opening up into farmland. Only when we reached that point, when the trees fell away and the vast open fields spread out around us, did I feel the tension in my chest begin to ease slightly. I pulled over to the side of the road and stopped, the Davidson's truck coming to a halt behind me. I sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the wheel, trying to process what I'd just seen. My mind wanted to rationalize it. A bear, perhaps, standing on its hind legs, distorted by the rain and poor visibility. But I knew that wasn't right. The proportions, the movement, the sound it made, none of it matched any animal native to Oklahoma. I picked up my radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Pierce. What's the ETA on backup?" "Officers Keller and Walsh are about 10 minutes out," Jenny replied. "Ambulance is right behind them. What's your status?" I hesitated, unsure how to describe what we'd found. "Victim is deceased," I said finally. "Apparent animal attack, severe trauma. Tell the responding officers to approach with extreme caution. Possible dangerous predator still in the area." "Copy that," Jenny said. "Do you need additional units?" "Affirmative. And contact Wildlife Services. We're going to need their expertise on this." I set the radio down and stepped out of my car. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle, and the wind had died down. I approached the Davidson's truck, where all 3 family members sat in shocked silence. "You all okay?" I asked, knowing it was a ridiculous question under the circumstances. None of them were okay, not after what they'd witnessed. Robert rolled down his window. "What was that thing, Randall? That wasn't natural." I shook my head. "I don't know, but we've got backup coming and I've called Wildlife Services. We'll figure it out." "It killed my boy," Robert said, his voice hollow. "It tore him apart like he was nothing." I placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling the fine tremors running through his body. "I know, and I'm so sorry, but right now I need you all to stay strong. We need to tell the other officers exactly what we saw, everything we can remember. Details matter." Michael leaned forward from the back seat. "You think they'll believe us? About what that thing looked like?" It was a good question. I wasn't sure I believed what I'd seen myself. "Just tell them what you saw. Don't embellish, don't speculate, just the facts." I returned to my cruiser to wait for backup, my mind replaying that brief glimpse of the creature at the forest's edge. The image seemed burned into my retinas, the unnatural proportions, the way it moved, those eyes reflecting red in the headlights. And beneath the physical details, something else bothered me, something I couldn't quite articulate. It had watched us, studied us. There had been an intelligence in those eyes that went beyond animal cunning. And when it had pursued us, it had moved with purpose, not just predatory instinct. Whatever we had encountered in those woods, I had the unsettling feeling that the horror was just beginning. The flashing lights of approaching vehicles cut through the misty rain. 2 police cruisers followed by an ambulance, their headlights illuminating the wet asphalt in rhythmic pulses of red and blue. I stepped out of my car again as they pulled up, composing myself for the conversation ahead. Officers James Keller and Maria Walsh were first out of their vehicles. They were both relatively new to the force, Keller with 5 years under his belt, Walsh with just 3. But they were good cops, level-headed and thorough. Behind them, 2 EMTs emerged from the ambulance, looking expectantly in my direction. "What have we got, Pierce?" Keller asked, approaching with a hand resting on his holster, a habit we shared. Dispatch said animal attack. I nodded, leading them a few paces away from the Davidsons' truck. Kevin Davidson, age 19. He's about a quarter-mile into the woods off Black Creek Road. His father and brother found him after hearing screams. I lowered my voice. It's bad, Keller. Worst I've seen. Whatever got to him? It wasn't just killing for food. Walsh frowned. What do you mean? I mean the body looks like it was torn apart deliberately. And the tracks around the scene. They're not like anything I've encountered before. Keller's expression shifted from professional concern to skepticism. What, you think it's some kind of unknown animal? In Oklahoma? I'm just telling you what I saw, I replied, keeping my voice even. And it's not just the tracks. We saw it, Keller. Me and Robert Davidson. Saw what exactly? I hesitated, knowing how it would sound. Something large, moving on two legs, but not a bear. It pursued us back to the vehicles. Walsh and Keller exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They thought I was exaggerating, or that the stress and poor visibility had affected my judgment. I couldn't blame them. I might have reacted the same way if our positions were reversed. Look, I continued, I know how this sounds, but there's a dead boy in those woods, and whatever killed him is still out there. We need to secure the scene and get a search party organized at first light. You want to go back in there tonight? Walsh asked incredulously. We have to. We can't leave Kevin's body out there. His family deserves better than that. Keller nodded reluctantly. All right. Let's get more units out here and set up a perimeter. Walsh, radio in and request county backup. I'll talk to the Davidsons, get their statements. While they made the necessary arrangements, I approached the EMTs and gave them a brief overview of the situation. The victim is deceased, no need for life-saving measures, but we'll need body transport once we secure the scene. The older EMT, a weathered man named Doug, whom I'd worked with many times before, nodded grimly. We'll wait here until you give the all clear. You sure it's just an animal attack, not foul play? No human did this, I said with certainty. Whether you'd classify what did it as an animal is another question entirely. Within 30 minutes, additional units had arrived. 3 county sheriff's deputies and a state wildlife officer named Martinez who'd been working late in a neighboring county. The Davidsons had given their statements and been escorted to town by a deputy, where they would meet with the medical examiner to formally identify Kevin's body once it was retrieved. Our impromptu search party gathered at the forest edge, flashlights and shotguns distributed. The wildlife officer carried a tranquilizer rifle in addition to his sidearm. The rain had finally stopped, but the forest was saturated, water dripping constantly from leaves and branches. All right, I said, addressing the group. We move in formation, 5-yard spacing. I'll take point since I know where the body is located. Officer Martinez, you're our wildlife expert. You see anything, any sign of what we're dealing with, you sing out immediately. Everyone clear? Nods all around. I could see the tension in their faces, the way they held their weapons just a little too tightly. Word had spread about what Robert and I had seen, and while professional skepticism remained the dominant response, no one was taking chances. Stay alert, I added. This thing moved fast and hit hard. Don't assume it's gone. We entered the forest in single file before spreading out into our search formation. Flashlight beams crisscrossed the darkness, illuminating dripping foliage and mist-shrouded tree trunks. Every sound, water droplets hitting leaves, distant thunder, the creak of branches in the light wind, seemed magnified in the tense silence. I led them along the path I'd taken with Robert, moving more slowly this time, scanning constantly. When we reached the spot where we'd seen the tracks earlier, I stopped, directing my light to the ground. Here, I said to Martinez. There were clear prints here, but the rain might have washed them away. The wildlife officer crouched down, examining the muddy soil carefully. After a moment, he looked up, his expression troubled. There's still some definition here. These aren't bear tracks, and definitely not canine or feline. He traced the outline of a partially visible print with his finger. The structure is all wrong, almost looks like a primate, but much larger than anything native to North America. Could it be a person? Walsh asked. Someone wearing some kind of modified boots? Martinez shook his head. The stride length and depth suggest something weighing at least 300 pounds, possibly more. And look at these claw marks. They're deep, gouged into hard soil. No human could apply that kind of force. We continued forward, everyone on heightened alert after Martinez's assessment. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches reaching like grasping fingers, shadows deepening despite our lights. I found myself starting at every sound, my hand never straying far from my weapon. The smell reached us before we saw the clearing, that distinctive metallic scent of blood mixed with something musky and animal. Several officers gagged, one turning away to compose himself. "Prepare yourselves," I warned, as we approached the spot where Kevin's body lay. It's not an easy sight. We entered the clearing, flashlights converging on the gruesome scene. Even knowing what to expect, the impact of seeing Kevin's mangled remains again hit me hard. Several officers swore under their breath, and Martinez let out a long, slow whistle of disbelief. "Mother of God," Keller murmured, his earlier skepticism evaporating. "What could do this to a person?" Martinez approached the body cautiously, crouching beside it with professional detachment. He examined the wounds without touching anything, occasionally pausing to take notes or photographs. After several minutes, he stood up, his face grave. "This isn't consistent with any predator I'm familiar with," he said. "The bite radius is enormous, larger than a grizzly's, but the pattern is wrong. And these claw marks," he pointed to deep lacerations across what remained of Kevin's torso. "They show a dexterity you don't see in bears or big cats. Almost like hands, not paws." "Any theories?" I asked. Martinez hesitated. "Nothing scientific. Nothing I'd want to put in an official report." A sound interrupted our conversation. A distant cracking of branches too heavy to be caused by falling rainwater. Every flashlight beam immediately swung toward the source, cutting through the darkness at the far side of the clearing. "Movement. 2 o'clock, Walsh whispered, her shotgun raised. We stood frozen, listening intently. For several seconds, nothing. Then another sound, a soft thud, like a heavy footfall, closer this time. "Spread out," I ordered quietly. "Form a perimeter around the body. Martinez, get that tranq rifle ready." The officers moved into position, weapons raised, flashlights scanning the trees. The wildlife officer chambered a dart in his rifle, his movements deliberate and practiced despite the tension evident in his face. Another sound, from a different direction now, behind us. Then another, to our left. The realization hit me with chilling clarity. It was circling us, testing our defenses from multiple angles. "It's trying to flank us," Keller said, voicing my thoughts. "Smart bastard." A low growl emanated from the darkness, that same deep, vibrating sound I'd heard earlier, the one that seemed to resonate in your chest rather than your ears. Several flashlight beams converged on the source, but illuminated nothing but empty forest. "What the hell was that?" one of the deputies asked, his voice tight with controlled fear. Before anyone could answer, something large crashed through the undergrowth directly ahead of us, a dark shape moving with incredible speed. Flashlights tracked it, catching glimpses of matted fur and long limbs as it circled the perimeter of our group. "Hold your fire unless you have a clear shot," I shouted as several officers raised their weapons. "Don't risk hitting each other." The creature moved again, this time charging directly toward our line. In the crossing beams of our flashlights, I got my first clear look at what we were facing. It ran on 2 legs but bent forward, using its abnormally long arms for balance and additional propulsion. Its body was covered in dark matted fur, and its face, God, its face was a nightmare. Elongated like a wolf's muzzle but larger, with jaws that seemed to split the head nearly in half when opened. Those eyes glowed dully in our lights, reflecting that strange reddish color I'd noticed earlier. "Fire!" Keller shouted as the creature closed the distance with shocking speed. Shotguns roared in the confined space, the reports deafening. The creature jerked as at least one shot connected, dark fluid spattering from its shoulder, but it didn't slow. Martinez fired his tranquilizer rifle, the dart striking the creature in the flank. It let out a roar of rage, an inhuman sound that sent primal fear coursing through my veins. And then it was upon us. It hit our line like a freight train, scattering officers in all directions. I caught a glimpse of Walsh being thrown through the air, her shotgun flying from her grip. A deputy went down, screaming as claws raked across his chest. I raised my sidearm and fired repeatedly, the muzzle flash lighting up the clearing in strobing bursts. The creature whirled toward me, moving faster than anything its size had a right to move. I emptied my magazine, backing away as I fired, certain that my last sight would be those massive jaws closing around my head. But then Keller was there, his shotgun pressed almost directly against the creature's side as he fired both barrels in rapid succession. The creature howled, a sound of pain and fury that echoed through the forest, and swung one massive arm, catching Keller across the chest and sending him flying into a tree trunk with a sickening impact. The attack had given me just enough time to reload. I raised my weapon again, but the creature was already retreating, moving back into the darkness with that same uncanny speed. Several officers fired after it, but it was gone, leaving only the echo of that terrible howl hanging in the air. "Officer down!" someone shouted. "We need medical, now!" I rushed to Keller's side. He was conscious but dazed, blood seeping from a cut on his forehead where he'd struck the tree. "Did we get it?" he gasped, trying to sit up. "Stay down," I ordered, checking him for other injuries. His chest was badly bruised where the creature had struck him, but his body armor had prevented worse damage. "It's gone for now, but it's wounded." Martinez's tranquilizer hit too. Walsh appeared beside me, limping but otherwise intact. "Peterson's hurt bad," she said, referring to the deputy who'd been clawed. "They're stabilizing him now. We need to get everyone out of here while we can." I nodded, helping Keller to his feet. "Get the wounded to the ambulance, and we need to recover Kevin's body. We're not leaving him out here." The next 20 minutes were a blur of activity. The EMTs had rushed into the forest after hearing the gunfire, and now worked frantically to stabilize the injured deputy. 2 officers fashioned a makeshift stretcher for Kevin's remains, covering him with a tarp out of respect. We moved as quickly as we could, constantly scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of the creature's return. By some miracle, we made it back to the road without further incident. The injured were loaded into the ambulance, which departed immediately for the hospital in the next county over. Kevin's body was placed in a county coroner's van that had arrived during our absence. The remaining officers gathered in a tight group beside our vehicles, faces pale and drawn in the harsh glare of headlights. "What the hell was that thing?" Walsh asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. No one had an answer. Martinez was checking his tranquilizer rifle, his movements agitated. "Whatever it is, I hit it with enough ketamine to drop a bull elk. It should have been unconscious within seconds, not running off like it was nothing." "Will it die from its injuries?" I asked. "It took multiple shotgun blasts." The wildlife officer shook his head. "No way to know, but judging by how it moved after being hit, I wouldn't count on it. That thing is tough." "So what's the plan?" one of the deputies asked. "We can't just leave it out there. What if it attacks someone else?" I considered our options. We were down multiple officers, with one seriously injured. It was the middle of the night, in difficult terrain, and our adversary had already proven itself both dangerous and cunning. We set up a perimeter, I decided. Block all the roads leading in and out of this area. No one goes into those woods until daylight. At first light, we bring in more manpower, dogs if we can get them, and we hunt this thing down methodically. No one argued. We were all professional enough to recognize when pressing forward would be foolhardy rather than brave. The creature had the advantage in the darkness, in its home territory. Daylight would at least even the odds somewhat. As the other officers began organizing the perimeter, I pulled Martinez aside. "You said you had theories about what this might be. I need to hear them. Official report be damned." The wildlife officer glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard, then spoke in a low voice. "Every culture has legends, Pierce. Stories about creatures that live in the wild places, that hunt humans. Most of them are just myths, ways for people to process their fear of the natural world. But sometimes myths have kernels of truth. There have been reports over the years, all over the country, not just here, of encounters with something that matches parts of what we saw tonight. The Native Americans of this region had stories about skinwalkers, shapeshifters that could take animal form. Further north, there are legends of the Wendigo, a creature that was once human but was transformed by cannibalism into something monstrous. I shook my head. "You're talking folklore, not biology." "Am I?" Martinez challenged. "You saw that thing move. You saw what it did to that boy. Was any of that normal biology as you understand it?" He had a point. Nothing about our encounter fit within the boundaries of the natural world as I knew it. The creature's appearance, its strength, its intelligence, all defied conventional explanation. "So what do we do?" I asked. "How do you hunt something like this?" Martinez checked his rifle again, a nervous habit. Cautiously, and with overwhelming force. He met my eyes. "And Pierce? Don't assume shooting it will be enough. If this is what I think it is, bullets might just make it angry." Those words stayed with me as we established our perimeter, setting up roadblocks and warning systems around the forest boundary. The night stretched on, each minute crawling by with excruciating slowness. Occasionally distant sounds would reach us from the depths of the woods, cracking branches, rustling vegetation, once that same bone-chilling howl we'd heard earlier. As I sat in my cruiser, monitoring the radio and watching the tree line, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was out there, watching us in return. studying our defenses, learning our patterns, waiting for an opportunity. And I knew, with a certainty that defied rational explanation, that this was just the beginning of our ordeal. Dawn broke over Marlow with agonizing slowness, the sun struggling to penetrate heavy cloud cover that had settled in overnight. The forest edges gradually became visible in the gray light, revealing dripping trees and mist that clung to the undergrowth like ghostly fingers. Our perimeter had held through the night, no reports of sightings, no further attacks, but the tension remained palpable among the assembled officers and volunteers. By 7 a.m., reinforcements had arrived. The county sheriff's department had sent every available deputy, the state police had dispatched a tactical unit, and wildlife services had brought in specialized tracking dogs. Even the mayor had shown up briefly, his face grim as I briefed him on the situation. He'd left to organize an emergency town hall meeting, warning residents to stay indoors until further notice. The command center was a collection of vehicles and portable equipment set up in a clearing near the road. Maps were spread across the hood of my cruiser, areas marked off in grid patterns for the search teams. Martinez was conferring with the dog handlers, explaining the creature's scent characteristics as best he could. Sheriff Bill Donovan, a burly man with 30 years of law enforcement experience, stood beside me reviewing the search plan. "We've got enough manpower to cover most of the immediate area," he said, tracing a circle on the map. "Teams of 4, each with at least 2 armed officers and 1 dog. Radio check-ins every 15 minutes. I nodded, noting the thoroughness of the preparations. "What about the Adams property?" I asked, pointing to a large tract of land at the eastern edge of our search area. "There's an old mine entrance there. Could be a place for this thing to hide." "Good thinking," Donovan agreed. "I'll assign one of the tactical teams to check it out specifically." A commotion at the edge of our makeshift command post drew our attention. Dr. Eleanor Reeves, the county medical examiner, was making her way toward us, her face set in professional determination. I excused myself from the sheriff and went to meet her. "Dr. Reeves," I greeted her. "I didn't expect you out here. After what I saw last night, I couldn't stay away," she replied. Dr. Reeves was in her 50s, with steel gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen every possible way a human body could fail. "I've completed the preliminary examination of Kevin Davidson's remains, and?" I prompted when she hesitated. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "And I've never seen anything like it, Pierce. The pattern of injuries, the bite marks, they don't match any known predator. The force required to inflict that kind of damage." She shook her head. "It's beyond what even a grizzly could do." "Could it have been multiple animals?" I suggested, grasping for rational explanations. "No. The attack pattern is consistent. Same bite radius, same claw spacing. This was one creature." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "And there's something else. The wounds show evidence of deliberate mutilation." "What do you mean?" "I mean that some of the damage wasn't just killing or feeding behavior. Some of it was purposeful, like it was sending a message." A chill ran down my spine despite the warming morning air. "A message to who?" "To us, I imagine." Dr. Reeves met my eyes directly. "Whatever did this, Pierce, it wanted the body to be found. It wanted us to see." Before I could respond, one of the dog handlers approached, his expression troubled. "We've got a problem," he said. "The dogs won't enter the forest. They get to the tree line and just stop, whining, backing away. I've never seen behavior like this, even with predator sense." Martinez joined us, having overheard. "Animals often sense things we can't," he said. "If the dogs are refusing, there's a reason. We can't just abandon the search," I argued. "There are farms and isolated homes all through these woods. People could be at risk." "I'm not suggesting we abandon anything," Martinez clarified. "But we need to adjust our approach. If the dogs won't lead, we proceed carefully, staying in tight formation." Sheriff Donovan called for everyone's attention, and the assembled search teams gathered around. He outlined the revised plan, emphasizing safety procedures and communication protocols. Teams would search assigned grid sections but maintain visual contact with each other whenever possible. "Remember," he concluded, "we're dealing with an unknown predator that's already killed one person and injured others. Your safety is priority 1. If you spot the target, do not, I repeat, do not engage alone. Radio your position and wait for backup." The search began at 8:30 a.m., teams entering the forest at designated points along its perimeter. I led one group, consisting of Deputy Walsh, 2 state troopers, and a wildlife officer named Collins. The dogs still refused to accompany us, so we moved without their tracking assistance. relying instead on visual signs and our own intuition. The forest felt different in daylight, still imposing but less immediately threatening. Water dripped constantly from the canopy above, creating a gentle background patter that would have been soothing under different circumstances. We moved in formation, weapons ready, scanning the vegetation for any sign of our quarry. About half a mile in, Collins stopped suddenly, raising his hand for silence. He pointed to a nearby tree trunk, a large oak with rough bark. At about eye level, 3 deep, parallel gouges had been cut into the wood, the exposed inner bark still oozing sap. "Claw marks," he whispered. "Fresh, within the last few hours." "Marking territory?" Walsh suggested. Collins shook his head. "This is too deliberate for typical territorial marking. It's almost like it's leaving signs for us to follow," I finished, the realization dawning with disturbing clarity. "It's leading us somewhere." We radioed our findings to the command post, then continued forward with heightened caution. Similar marks appeared on other trees, always in our direct path, always fresh. The pattern was unmistakable. Whatever we were tracking wanted to be found, or more precisely, wanted to lead us to a specific location. The trail of markings led us deeper into the forest, away from the other search teams and into an area of older growth where the trees were larger and more widely spaced. The ground sloped downward gradually, and the soil became rockier. After about 20 minutes, we emerged into a natural clearing surrounded by massive oak trees. In the center stood the burnt-out remains of what had once been a small cabin. "Hold position," I ordered, surveying the scene carefully. "Collins, what do you make of this?" The wildlife officer studied the clearing, his experienced eyes noting details the rest of us might miss. This was a hunter's cabin, probably abandoned decades ago. But look at the ground around it. Disturbed recently. Something's been active here. We approached the cabin ruins cautiously, weapons raised. Only the stone foundation and chimney remained intact. The wooden walls and roof long since collapsed and partially reclaimed by the forest. But among the charred timbers and growth, there were signs of recent habitation, flattened areas where something large had rested, scattered animal bones, some still bearing flesh. "It's been using this place as a den," Walsh said, her voice tight with tension. Collins crouched to examine something half buried in the dirt. He brushed away leaves and soil to reveal a metal tag, a hunting license from 19 years earlier. "This place has history," he murmured. "Old history." A crackling from our radios interrupted the moment. "All units be advised," came Sheriff Donovan's voice, distorted by static. "Team 3 has found tracks leading to the Adams Mine entrance. Tactical unit is moving to investigate." I raised my radio. "Sheriff, this is Pierce. We've found what appears to be the creature's den, an old cabin in grid section E7, signs of recent activity but no visual on the target." "Copy that, Pierce. Secure the area but do not enter any structures. Wait for backup." "Roger that," I replied, then turned to my team. "You heard the man. Let's establish a perimeter," and a distant sound cut me off, a series of quick, sharp reports that could only be gunfire, followed by shouting that even at this distance was recognizably panicked. "Shots fired," came a frantic voice over the radio. "Adams Mine entrance. It's here. It's—" The transmission cut off abruptly. "Team 3, report," Sheriff Donovan demanded. Static was the only response. "That's less than a mile east of our position," Collins said, already orienting himself in the direction of the mine. "Move out," I ordered without hesitation. Tactical approach. Maintain formation. We ran through the forest, no longer concerned with stealth. The sounds of continuing gunfire guided us, sporadic at first, then a concentrated burst, then nothing. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the chaos had been. We reached the mine entrance 12 minutes later, emerging from the trees into a small clearing dominated by the dark mouth of the old shaft. 2 vehicles were parked haphazardly nearby, a county sheriff's SUV and a state police cruiser. The doors stood open, equipment scattered around them as if their occupants had deployed in a hurry. There was no sign of Team 3. "Team 3, this is Deputy Walsh," she called into her radio. "Do you copy?" Nothing but static responded. We approached the mine entrance cautiously. It was an old operation, long abandoned. The opening partially collapsed and reinforced with timber supports that had rotted over decades. A set of rusted rails extended from the darkness before disappearing into overgrown weeds. Just inside the entrance we found the first blood. Dark spatters on the rocky ground leading deeper into the shaft. Beside them a dropped shotgun, its barrel bent at an unnatural angle, as if it had been twisted by something impossibly strong. "They went in," Collins whispered, stating the obvious. "Or were dragged in." I keyed my radio. "Sheriff, this is Pierce. We're at the Adams mine. Team 3 appears to have entered the shaft. We have blood and abandoned weapons but no visual on personnel." Sheriff Donovan's response was immediate. "Do not enter that mine, Pierce. I repeat, do not enter. We're deploying all remaining units to your location." I stared into the darkness of the shaft, imagining the members of Team 3 somewhere inside, possibly wounded, possibly dying. Waiting meant death for anyone still alive in there. "Sheriff, we have officers down," I replied. "We're going in." I switched off my radio before he could order me to stand down. Turning to my team, I saw a mixture of fear and determination on their faces. "Anyone who wants to wait for backup, now's the time to say so," I told them. No judgment. No one spoke. Walsh checked her shotgun, her hands steady despite the circumstances. The state troopers readied their rifles. Collins drew his sidearm, his expression grim. "We stay together," I instructed. "Flashlights on, weapons ready. If we find survivors, that's our priority. Get them out immediately. If we encounter the target," I paused, "aim for the head or center mass. Don't stop firing until it goes down and stays down." We entered the mine shaft in tight formation, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The air inside was cold and damp, with an acrid undertone that caught in the back of my throat. Our footsteps echoed off the narrow walls, the sound seeming to travel deeper into the earth than should have been possible. The blood trail continued, occasional droplets leading us forward. About 50 yards in, the main shaft branched off in 3 directions. The blood followed the leftmost passage, so we did too. "Pierce," Walsh whispered, her voice barely audible. "Look at the walls." I directed my flashlight where she indicated. The rough stone surface of the tunnel was marked with the same 3-clawed gouges we'd seen on the trees, but here they formed distinct patterns, shapes that almost resembled crude writing, symbols of some kind repeated at regular intervals. "What the hell?" one of the state troopers murmured. "Are those words?" Before anyone could respond, a sound reached us from deeper in the tunnel, a low moan, human in origin but weak, pained. We moved forward more quickly, following the passage as it curved downward, descending deeper beneath the forest above. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, an excavated area where miners had once extracted whatever ore they'd been seeking. Our flashlights revealed a scene from a nightmare. 3 bodies lay scattered across the rocky floor, their uniforms identifying them as members of Team 3. 2 were clearly dead, their throats torn out, eyes staring sightlessly at the cavern ceiling. The third, a young deputy named Rodriguez, was propped against the far wall, still breathing but badly wounded. Blood soaked his left side, and his right arm hung at an unnatural angle. "Help!" he gasped when he saw us, his voice barely audible. "It's still here. It's still..." Movement flickered at the edge of our light beams, something large shifting position in one of the darker recesses of the chamber. All flashlights swung toward it immediately, weapons raised. The creature emerged slowly from the shadows, walking upright on 2 legs with an almost deliberate gait. In the harsh artificial light, I could see it clearly for the first time. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark matted fur. Its limbs were long and powerfully muscled, ending in hands and feet with curved, yellowed claws. But it was the face that defied comprehension, a muzzle like a wolf's but larger, jaws that could open impossibly wide, revealing rows of serrated teeth, and those eyes, deeply set in the skull, glowing with a dull reddish light that seemed to absorb rather than reflect our flashlight beams. "Jesus," Walsh breathed beside me, her shotgun wavering slightly before steadying again. The creature tilted its head, studying us with an intelligence that was more terrifying than any animal ferocity could have been. It made no move to attack, just watched, as if waiting for something. "On my mark," I whispered, barely moving my lips. 3, 2, before I could finish the countdown, the creature's mouth opened, not in a snarl or roar, but in a deliberate movement. And then, impossibly, it spoke. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was deep, guttural, each word forced through a throat and mouth not designed for human speech. Yet the words were unmistakable, the syntax perfect. This wasn't animal mimicry, this was language, comprehension. My finger froze on the trigger. Beside me, I could feel the others similarly paralyzed with shock. The creature took a step forward, its movement fluid despite its bulk. "This is my place," it continued, those red eyes fixed on me specifically. "My hunting ground. It can talk, Collins whispered, his voice shaking. How can it talk? The creature's mouth opened again in what might have been a grotesque approximation of a smile. I was like you once. That was enough to break the spell of shock. Fire! I shouted, squeezing the trigger of my weapon. The others responded instantly, the confined space of the cavern amplifying the reports into deafening thunder. Bullets tore into the creature's body, dark fluid spraying from multiple impact points. It staggered backward under the onslaught but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a roar of rage and pain, the sound vibrating through the rock beneath our feet, and then it charged. What followed was chaos. The creature moved with that same impossible speed I'd witnessed the night before, crossing the chamber in seconds. It struck the nearest state trooper with one long arm, sending him flying into the cavern wall with bone-crushing force. Walsh got off another shotgun blast that tore a chunk from the creature's shoulder, but it barely slowed. I emptied my magazine into its center mass, the impacts driving it back momentarily. "Get Rodriguez!" I shouted to Collins, who had taken up position near the wounded deputy. "Get him out!" Collins grabbed Rodriguez, hauling him to his feet while continuing to fire one-handed with his sidearm. The second state trooper provided covering fire as they began retreating toward the tunnel entrance. The creature recovered quickly, charging again with renewed fury. This time it headed straight for me. I tried to reload, fingers fumbling with a fresh magazine, knowing I wouldn't be fast enough. Walsh stepped between us, her shotgun leveled at the creature's head. "Eat this, you son of a bitch," she growled, and pulled the trigger. The blast caught the creature directly in the face, tearing away a portion of its muzzle in a spray of bone and tissue. It howled, a sound of pain and hatred that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, and fell back, clawing at what remained of its face. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Walsh by the arm and pulling her toward the tunnel. "Now!" We fled, half carrying the state trooper who'd been thrown against the wall. He was conscious but dazed, blood streaming from a head wound. Behind us, the creature's howls continued, echoing through the mine shaft in a terrible cacophony. The climb back to the surface seemed to take hours, though it was probably only minutes. Collins and Rodriguez had gotten ahead of us, and we emerged from the mine entrance to find a massive response force had arrived. County deputies, state police, even a National Guard unit that had been training nearby. Sheriff Donovan rushed forward as we stumbled into daylight. "Pierce, what the hell happened down there?" "It's still inside," I gasped, helping lower the injured trooper to the ground where medical personnel quickly took over. "It's wounded but alive." "And Sheriff," I grabbed his arm, making sure I had his full attention. "It spoke to us. In English. Said it was like us once. Care to share?" I turned back to face him. What if it wasn't lying? What if it really was human once? What if it's still out there because this is its home? Because it remembers being one of us, living among us? Donovan's face paled slightly. "You're talking about transformation. That's fairy tale stuff. Werewolves and monsters. Is it?" I challenged. "After what we saw, can you really say what's possible and what isn't anymore?" He had no answer for that. Neither did I, really. Just questions that kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, remembering those red eyes and that terrible, rumbling voice emerging from what should have been an animal's throat. I left the sheriff's office and stepped into the rain, pulling my coat collar up against the chill. Main Street was nearly empty, most of Marlowe's residents having sought shelter from the downpour. I walked to my cruiser, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched that had become my constant companion. As I settled behind the wheel, my radio crackled to life. "All units, we have a report of unusual activity at the old Thornton farm on County Road 327. Caller reports hearing unusual sounds and possible property damage." I reached for the receiver, then hesitated. The Thornton farm was on the outskirts of town, right at the edge of the forest that stretched all the way to Black Creek. The same forest where we'd encountered the creature. "Dispatch, this is Officer Pierce," I replied finally. "I'm en route to the Thornton farm. ETA 10 minutes. As I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, I couldn't help glancing at the tree line visible at the end of Main Street. A dark wall of vegetation made hazy by the falling rain. For a moment I thought I saw movement there, a tall shape watching from just within the shadows. Then it was gone, if it had ever been there at all. I turned on my sirens and accelerated through the rain-slicked streets, heading toward whatever waited at the Thornton farm. Because that was my job now. Not just enforcing the law or protecting the citizens of Marlowe, but standing guard against something that most people would never believe existed. Something that had spoken with a human voice, that had recognized what it once was, that hunted not just for food but for reasons I might never understand. And as I drove, the rain beating a steady rhythm on the roof of my cruiser, I knew with absolute certainty that it wasn't over. The horror that had begun at Black Creek hadn't ended with a sealed mine shaft or a sanitized report. It was still out there, waiting in the shadows between the trees, waiting for night to fall again. The wind howls different up here. That's what they don't tell you in the training manuals or orientation videos. In the lower 48, wind is just air moving from one place to another. In the Alaskan wilderness, wind carries voices. My name is Ahanu Black. In the old Algonquin tongue, they say it means he laughs. Not much to laugh about these days. I've been a ranger at Denali National Park for 16 seasons now. Before that, I spent 5 years at Olympic in Washington State, but Alaska called to me. No, that's not quite right. Alaska screamed for me. I remember packing up my small apartment in Port Angeles, my supervisor looking at me like I'd lost my mind. Alaska? In winter? You're asking for a hardship post? He shuffled the transfer papers, his bushy eyebrows furrowed. The pay's barely better, and the cost of living will eat whatever increase you get. I just nodded. How could I explain that I needed to go north? That something in my blood, in the marrow of my bones, pulled me toward the last great wilderness. My grandfather, full-blooded Athabascan, told me stories as a child about our people's homeland. Stories I'd forgotten until they started invading my dreams. The truth was, I was drowning in debt. College loans for a degree in environmental science that seemed worth less each passing year. Credit card bills from a relationship gone sour. She left, but the furniture payment stayed. The transfer came with a small signing bonus, enough to keep the wolves from the door, at least for a while. What I didn't tell my supervisor, what I couldn't tell anyone, was that I'd been having the dreams, the same dream night after night. A vast lake, silver under moonlight, a cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, and something moving in the tree line, something watching, something waiting. In the dream, I'm never afraid, just expectant. Like I've been holding my breath my entire life, and soon, finally, I'll be allowed to exhale. I arrived at my posting in early October. The tourist season had wound down, and the park was transitioning to its winter sleep. My cabin, a ranger outpost really, sat on the shore of Wonder Lake, some 85 miles into the park. The nearest neighbor was 30 miles away, another ranger named Marcus, who'd been in Alaska even longer than I had and preferred the isolation to anything civilization offered. The cabin was nothing special. One main room with a wood stove, a small bedroom, and a bathroom with a shower that ran ice-cold more often than not. But that view would make even the most hardened city dweller believe in something greater than themselves. The lake stretched out before me, and beyond it, when the weather was clear, the massive face of Denali itself, the Great One, tallest mountain in North America. My job was simple during these quiet months. Patrol for poachers, assist any late-season hikers who might have underestimated the rapidly approaching winter, and monitor wildlife activity before the deep freeze. I had a satellite phone for emergencies, a well-stocked pantry, and enough firewood to last until spring. The first month passed uneventfully. I settled into a routine, hiking a different section of my territory each day, noting animal signs, checking trail conditions. I logged my findings dutifully each night in the Ranger database via a painfully slow satellite connection. It was on the 36th day that I first noticed the tracks. I was following the northern shore of the lake, an area popular with moose during the rutting season. The ground was already dusted with the first light snow of the year, just enough to record the passage of wildlife. I recognized most tracks easily enough: the wide, splayed prints of moose, the five-toed pattern of wolverine, the perfect oval punches of snowshoe hare. But these were different. At first glance, they resembled wolf tracks. We had several packs in the region. But something was off. They were too large, the stride too long, and they showed an unusual pattern, almost as if the creature had stopped occasionally to rise up on its hind legs. I crouched down, running my fingers over the impression. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the October air. These tracks seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappeared just as mysteriously at the water's edge. That night I reported the unusual tracks, classifying them as possible undocumented wolf behavior. But as I stared into the flames of my wood stove, a word whispered through my mind, a word from childhood stories, from my grandfather's low voice speaking across the years. Skinwalker. I dismissed the thought immediately. I was a scientist, after all, a federal employee with a degree and a badge. I didn't believe in the old stories, the legends of witches who could take animal form, of evil that wore the skins of wolves or bears to hunt the unwary. But that night, the dream came again. The the cabin, the watching presence. Only this time, for the first time, I turned to face what lurked in the shadows. I woke up screaming, the sound echoing off the cabin walls before being swallowed by the vastness outside. I couldn't remember what I'd seen, only that I'd never been so terrified in my life. And then I heard it. A scratching at my door. The scratching continued, light but insistent. My heart hammered against my ribs as I fumbled for the flashlight I kept by my bed. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the Spartan furnishings of the main room. "Who's there?" I called out, hating the tremor in my voice. The scratching stopped. I slid out of bed, grabbed my service pistol from its lockbox, and approached the door. The reasonable part of my mind suggested it was probably just a curious fox or a marten. Small creatures often investigated human dwellings in the wilderness. But another part, a deeper, older part connected to the stories my grandfather told around smoky fires, whispered other possibilities. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. After counting to 3, I yanked it open, gun raised, flashlight sweeping the darkness. Empty. The small porch was vacant, the woods beyond still. The temperature had dropped further, and my breath formed ghostly plumes in the beam of the flashlight. I stepped outside, scanning the area. That's when I saw them. Tracks in the fresh dusting of snow. The same strange tracks I'd found by the lake that morning, leading right up to my door, then circling the cabin before disappearing into the tree line. I followed the beam of my flashlight to where the tracks vanished among the black spruce. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw eyes reflecting the light back at me. Not the familiar eyeshine of a nocturnal animal, but something higher off the ground. Something watching me from what would be a standing position. I fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked the silence like an axe through ice, echoing across the lake. Nothing moved. Nothing responded. I retreated inside, double-checking the locks, dragging a chair in front of the door for good measure. Sleep was out of the question now. I stoked the wood stove and put on a pot of coffee, then radioed Marcus. "You're up early," he said, his voice crackling through the static. "Everything okay at Wonder Lake?" I hesitated. What could I say? That I was spooked by some tracks in a bad dream? That I'd fired my weapon because I thought I saw eyes in the woods? "Just checking in," I lied. Thought I heard some unusual activity. Probably nothing. The radio went quiet for a moment. "You know, Ahanu, the first winter's always the hardest. The isolation plays tricks on your mind." "I'm fine," I insisted, just being cautious. Sure, say, you should come by next week. I've got a supply drop coming in. We could have a proper meal, maybe watch a movie. Break up the monotony." "I'd like that," I said, realizing how desperate I was for human contact. "Oh, and Ahanu, don't go wandering out at night. We've had reports of a large predator in the area. Probably just a wolverine or a rogue bear that hasn't denny up yet, but still, be careful." After signing off, I pulled out the park's wildlife guidebook and flipped through it, looking for anything that might explain the tracks. Nothing matched. On impulse, I opened my laptop and, using the painfully slow satellite internet, searched for skinwalker tracks. The results were a mix of indigenous folklore, paranormal enthusiast sites, and first-hand accounts on forums like Reddit. One post in particular caught my eye. "I worked as a guide in the Four Corners region for 6 years. Never believed the stories until I found the tracks. They looked like wolf prints, but too big, and sometimes they'd change, like the thing would go from 4 legs to 2. The locals wouldn't talk about it, but an old Navajo man finally told me, 'When you see the tracks, it's already hunting you. It knows your name now.'" A chill ran down my spine. I slammed the laptop closed. Dawn found me still awake, eyes gritty, staring out the window at the lake. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the pink and gold of the rising sun. Beautiful, peaceful, as if the night's fears were nothing but the product of an overactive imagination. I decided to investigate the tracks in daylight. Armed with my sidearm, a camera, and plaster to make casts, I followed the trail around my cabin. In the morning light, they seemed less menacing, more puzzling. I took photos and made a cast of the clearest print. Then I followed them into the woods. The tracks led me on a meandering path through the trees, sometimes disappearing where the ground was too frozen or rocky to hold an impression, then reappearing yards later. After about a mile, they led to a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a crude structure, a tripod of branches lashed together with what looked like sinew. Hanging from the apex was a small leather pouch. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This was not standard wildlife behavior. This was human, or something trying to appear human. I approached cautiously. The pouch swung slightly in the breeze, Using a stick, I prodded it open. Inside was a small carved figure, roughly humanoid but with an elongated head, almost wolf-like. And wrapped around it was a single dark hair, too long to be animal fur, too coarse to be from a normal human head. As I stared at the figure, a sound behind me made me whirl around, hand going to my weapon. Nothing was there. But as I turned back to the strange shrine, I noticed something I'd missed before. Scratched into one of the support sticks was a single word, Ahanu, my name. My blood turned to ice. I backed away from the structure, then turned and ran, no longer caring about documenting or investigating. I ran until my lungs burned, until I burst from the tree line and saw my cabin squat and solid on the lakeshore. I didn't stop until I was inside with the door locked behind me. That afternoon, I filed a report about possible illegal activity in my sector, describing the strange tracks and the shrine-like structure. I mentioned nothing about the carving or my name. Those details seemed too personal, too terrifying to commit to an official record. The response came an hour later. Investigate possible illegal camping. Document and dismantle unauthorized structures. Standard protocol. Standard protocol. As if anything about this situation was standard. As darkness fell, I found myself checking and rechecking the locks, testing the satellite phone, cleaning my gun. Outside, the wind picked up, scraping branches against the cabin roof. Or at least I told myself it was branches. Just after midnight, the scratching at the door began again. The scratching continued, more urgent now, accompanied by something new. A low, huffing breath. Not the panting of a canine, but not human breathing either. Something in between. "Go away," I shouted, pistol aimed at the door. The scratching stopped. Then came a sound that caused my skin to crawl. A laugh. A human-like laugh, yet distorted, as if whoever or whatever was making it didn't quite understand the concept of laughter. It was a hideous parody, rising and falling in pitch before fading into the night. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. When dawn finally broke, I radioed dispatch to request a few days of emergency leave. "Reason?" the dispatcher asked, her voice tinny through the static. I hesitated. "Personal health concerns." "Approved. Marcus can cover your sector until Thursday. He'll check in on your cabin daily." Relief washed over me. I needed to get away, to clear my head, to find some answers. I packed a bag, locked up the cabin, and snowmobiled to the small ranger station at the park entrance where I'd left my truck months earlier. 3 hours later, I was in Fairbanks, checked into a cheap motel with spotty Wi-Fi and the blessed sounds of civilization outside my window. The noise of traffic, distant music, people talking and laughing, real human laughter, was like a balm to my frayed nerves. After a hot shower and a meal that didn't come from a can, I pulled out my laptop and began researching in earnest. First, I uploaded the photos of the tracks and the strange shrine, sending them to a former professor of mine who specialized in wildlife biology, asking for his professional opinion. Then I dove into research on skinwalkers and similar legends from northern indigenous peoples. The Navajo skinwalker was well documented, but I found references to similar entities in Athabascan, Inuit, and other Alaskan native traditions, beings that could shift between human and animal form, often with malevolent intent. One account from a Reddit forum caught my attention. My grandfather was Deghitan Athabascan. He told me about creatures called skin thieves that would stalk hunters in the boreal forest. They'd imitate human voices to lure you away from safety. But if you saw one directly, it would know your thoughts and come for you in your dreams. He said his brother encountered one in the 1950s near Mount Denali. It followed him for days, each night scratching at whatever shelter he made, each night getting closer. On the 5th night, my great-uncle said it spoke his name. I read account after account, finding patterns. The creatures were attracted to isolation. They toyed with their victims before attacking. They learned and used names. They left signs, markers like the shrine I'd found. At dusk, my phone rang, my professor returning my inquiry. "Ahanu, these tracks are fascinating," he said without preamble. "They're definitely Canid in origin, but the size and stride are all wrong. And this shift from quadrupedal to bipedal gait, I've never seen anything like it." "What about the structure?" I asked. "That's not my area, but it looks ritualistic." "Native, maybe, but not any tradition I recognize." "Where exactly did you find these?" I gave him the approximate coordinates. That area has a history of strange occurrences. Back in the 70s, there was a series of disappearances there, hikers who vanished without a trace. The official report blamed it on storms and exposure, but... He paused. "This is just between us, but a colleague of mine interviewed some of the local indigenous elders about those disappearances. They blamed something they called the one who wears many skins. Said it was drawn to the area because of a breach in some kind of natural order. My mouth went dry. What kind of breach? They weren't specific. Some kind of taboo broken by early settlers or prospectors. Listen, Ahanu, the scientific part of me says this is probably just an unusually large wolf with an injury that's forcing it to occasionally walk differently. But the human part of me, he sighed, just be careful out there. The wilderness doesn't forgive mistakes. After hanging up, I walked to a small bar down the street from my motel. I needed to be around people, needed the reminder that the world was more than just dark forests and strange tracks in the snow. The bar was dimly lit but warm, with a handful of patrons scattered around. I took a seat at the counter and ordered a whiskey. 2 stools down sat an older man, native Alaskan by his features, nursing what looked like the dregs of several beers. You look like you've seen something you wish you hadn't, he said suddenly, fixing me with a penetrating stare. I startled. Excuse me? Got that look about you. Seen it before. You work in the park system, don't you? He nodded at my jacket, which still bore the National Park Service logo. I'm a ranger at Denali, I admitted. Whereabouts? Wonder Lake. The man's expression changed subtly. All alone out there this time of year, aren't you? I nodded. He seemed to consider something, then slid over to the stool next to mine. Name's Thomas Ketzler. My people have lived in this region for thousands of years. Ahanu Black, I said, extending my hand. He shook it, his grip firm despite his apparent age. Black? You're not full-blooded, but I see it in your features. Athabascan, on my grandfather's side. Thomas nodded as if confirming something to himself. You've seen something out there by Wonder Lake. Something that's got you spooked enough to come into town mid-rotation. It wasn't a question. I hesitated, then decided I had nothing to lose. Tracks, I said quietly. Strange ones. And a structure in the woods. With my name on it. Thomas didn't look surprised. He didn't laugh or dismiss me. He simply nodded again and said, It's found you then. A chill ran down my spine. What has? We have different names for it. The younger generation calls it skinwalker because that's what they've heard on TV shows and podcasts. My grandmother called it Natsi Nida, the one who walks on the wind. He signaled the bartender for another round. When our drinks arrived, he continued, speaking so quietly I had to lean in to hear him. There are places in this world where the boundary between what is and what isn't thins out. Wonder Lake is one such place. That's why the Park Service has trouble keeping rangers stationed there for long. Most request transfers within a year. What is it? I asked again. Not a what, a who. Someone who gave up their humanity a long time ago for power. They shed their human skin and can wear the form of animals. But they're always hungry for the essence of those who still possess what they've lost. You're saying it's hunting me? Thomas took a long swallow of his beer. It's already caught you, son. The moment it learned your name, it formed a connection. It's just playing with you now. What does it want? To feast on your fear. To torment you until you're empty inside. Then, when there's nothing left, he made a sharp gesture across his throat. I drained my whiskey, the liquor burning a path to my stomach. How do I stop it? Most don't, Thomas said bluntly. But you've got Athabascan blood, that might help. My grandmother had a way passed down through generations. Not to kill it, it can't be killed. But to bind it, send it searching for easier prey. He pulled a napkin toward him and began drawing with a pen from his pocket. Symbols I didn't recognize, words in a language I couldn't read. You'll need these things, he said, listing items, sacred herbs, specific stones, materials for a protective circle. And you'll need courage. When it comes for you, and it will, you must look it in the eye. See it for what it truly is. Only then can you break its hold. I folded the napkin carefully and put it in my pocket. Thank you. Thomas placed a hand on my shoulder. One more thing, Ahanu. When it tries to speak to you, when it calls your name or tries to lure you, plug your ears. Its voice is its most dangerous weapon. It can make you hear what you most want to hear. As I left the bar, Thomas called after me. Remember who you are. Your name, Ahanu. It means he laughs. Find laughter in the darkness. That's how our people have survived. The next morning, I gathered the items Thomas had listed, visiting New Age shops and native craft stores. By afternoon, I was driving back toward Denali, my mind clearer, my resolve strengthened. Whatever awaited me at Wonder Lake, I would face it. I had no choice. Running would only postpone the inevitable. As I drove through the gathering dusk, the vast Alaskan wilderness spreading out around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was pacing me just beyond the reach of my headlights, keeping perfect time with my journey home. I returned to my cabin as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across Wonder Lake. The water had partially frozen during my absence, sheets of ice extending from the shoreline like grasping fingers. The temperature had dropped further, winter was closing in fast. Marcus had left a note taped to my door. Checked your cabin each day as requested. All quiet. Radio if you need anything. P.S. Found some strange tracks near your woodpile. Might want to secure your food supplies better. Could be a wolverine getting bold. If only it were that simple. I unloaded my supplies and immediately began preparing the protective measures Thomas had described. First, I created a paste from the sacred herbs, sweetgrass, sage, and a rare fungus that grows only on birch trees, mixing them with melted fat as instructed. With this, I drew symbols on all doors and windows, spiraling patterns that were meant to confuse and divert malevolent energies. Next, I laid a circle of the special stones, river-polished quartz with veins of red mineral running through them, around the perimeter of the cabin. Thomas had called them grandfather stones, saying they had absorbed the wisdom and protective power of countless generations. As darkness fell completely, I built up the fire in the wood stove, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and settled in for what I knew would be a long night. I checked my service weapon, placing it on the table beside me, though Thomas had warned it would be of little use. Bullets might slow it down, he'd said, but they won't stop it. Physical weapons can't kill what isn't truly alive in a way we understand. The wind picked up around midnight, whistling through the trees and across the frozen sections of the lake. I tried to focus on the paperback I'd brought back from town, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows, searching the darkness beyond. At 1:17 a.m., I remember checking my watch. I heard it. Not scratching this time, but a soft, melodic humming. A tune that sounded vaguely familiar, like something from my childhood that I couldn't quite place. It came from all around the cabin, as if the structure itself were vibrating with the sound. Then, a voice. Ahanu. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was my grandfather's voice. A voice I hadn't heard in 15 years, since his death. Impossible. Grandson, let me in. I've come so far to see you. My hands shook as I remembered Thomas's warning. It can make you hear what you most want to hear. You're not him, I said firmly, though my voice cracked. You're not my grandfather. A pause. Then laughter, that same horrible approximation of human amusement I'd heard before. Clever boy, the voice said, changing, distorting into something that sounded like multiple voices layered together. But are you clever enough? The temperature in the cabin plummeted suddenly. My breath fogged in front of me. The fire in the wood stove dimmed, though I could see no reason for it. Something heavy landed on the roof with a thud that shook dust from the rafters. Slow, deliberate footsteps moved across the ceiling, each one directly above my head as if the thing knew exactly where I was sitting. I moved to the center of the room, gun drawn, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The footsteps stopped directly above me. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then came a sound like claws dragging across the wooden shingles, followed by a thump against the stovepipe that sent sparks flying from the wood stove. I fired a shot through the ceiling, the report deafening in the confined space. A shriek answered, not animal, not human, but something horrible in between. The footsteps retreated rapidly, and I heard a heavy body slide off the roof and land in the snow outside. Silence descended once more. My ears rang from the gunshot, and the smell of cordite hung heavy in the air. I stood frozen, waiting, listening. Minutes stretched into an hour, nothing. Had I driven it away? As if in answer to my unspoken question, a tapping started at the window. Gentle at first, then more insistent. I turned slowly, raising my gun. The window was dark, but as I watched, a shape moved into view, a silhouette darker than the night behind it. Tall, unnaturally thin, with a head that seemed wrong somehow, elongated and pointed. See me, it whispered, its voice somehow inside my head rather than coming through the glass. See what I am, Ahanu. Thomas had said I needed to look it in the eye, to see it for what it truly was. But everything in me rebelled against the idea. Some primal instinct screamed that to truly see this thing would break something essential in my mind. The shape pressed closer to the glass. I could make out limbs now. Too many limbs, or perhaps limbs that kept shifting position, making it impossible to count them. Look at me, it commanded. I raised my eyes, fighting against every instinct, and I saw it. What stood outside my window wore the loose skin of a wolf like an ill-fitting coat, but beneath that disguise was something ancient and terrible. Its face was a nightmare collage of features, wolf muzzle stretching from a too-human face, eyes that burned with an intelligence that had nothing to do with humanity, that predated humanity. Those eyes locked with mine, and in that moment, I felt it reaching into me, rummaging through my memories, my fears, my very sense of self. "I know you now," it said, its voice a buzzing in my skull. "I know everything, your debts, your failures, the real reason you came to this place, running from your life, running from yourself." I couldn't look away. I was paralyzed, caught in its gaze like a mouse before a snake. "You will let me in, Ahanu," it continued. "Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, you'll open the door and welcome me, because the alternative is to remain alone with yourself, and that you cannot bear." With tremendous effort, I raised the gun and fired at the window. The glass shattered outward. The shape jerked back, and I heard a snarl of pain or anger, I couldn't tell which. Then came that awful laughter again, fading as the creature retreated into the darkness. I collapsed into my chair, shaking uncontrollably. The thing had seen into me, had named the truth I'd been hiding even from myself. I'd come to Alaska not just for the bonus or because of ancestral connection, but because I was running away from failed relationships, from mounting debt, from a life that seemed to be slipping through my fingers. For the rest of the night, I huddled in the center of the room, gun ready, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin settling. Outside, the wind continued to howl, carrying what sounded like distant, mocking laughter. Dawn came at last, pale and grudging. As the first gray light filtered through the broken window, I swept up the glass and covered the opening with a piece of plywood from my emergency supplies. The morning revealed new tracks in the snow around the cabin, the same strange prints I'd seen before, but now they were accompanied by dark spots that I realized with a start were blood. I'd wounded it. The creature could be hurt. This realization gave me a flicker of hope. If it could bleed, perhaps Thomas was wrong. Perhaps it could be killed. I followed the blood trail to the edge of the woods, where it disappeared among the trees. I didn't dare go further. Not yet. I needed to prepare, to rest, to think. Back in the cabin, I radioed Marcus. "It's good to hear your voice," he said when I identified myself. "Everything okay out there? Weather Service says we've got a major storm system moving in tonight." "Not really," I admitted. "Listen, Marcus, have you ever heard stories about skinwalkers in this area?" The radio went silent for so long I thought we'd lost connection. "Marcus? Yeah, I'm here," he finally responded, his voice noticeably tenser. "Where'd you hear about that?" "I've been seeing things. Tracks. Signs. Last night something attacked my cabin." Another long pause. "Ahanu, I think you should come stay with me until this storm passes. My place is more secure, and two heads are better than one if we're dealing with a predator." "This isn't a normal predator," I said. "I know," he replied quietly. "That's why you shouldn't be alone." I considered his offer. The thought of companionship, of not facing another night alone with that thing stalking outside, was tempting. "I can be there by nightfall," Marcus continued. "We'll snowmobile back together." As he spoke, I noticed something outside the window, a flicker of movement at the tree line. I squinted, trying to make it out. A wolf stood at the edge of the forest, larger than any wolf I'd ever seen. It stared directly at the cabin, at me, with an intelligence that no normal animal could possess. As I watched, it rose slowly onto its hind legs, its front paws dangling awkwardly like hands. "Ahanu? You still there?" Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. The wolf thing raised one paw/hand to its muzzle, in what was unmistakably a gesture of silence. I can't leave," I said, my eyes locked on the creature. "The storm's coming too fast. I'll hunker down here." "You sure?" I'm sure." I cut him off. "I'll check in tomorrow. Over and out." I set down the radio, my hand trembling. Outside, the creature dropped back to all fours and melted into the forest. It had heard me through the walls. It had understood the conversation, and it had made its wishes clear. I was to remain alone. The storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and heavy with snow. By nightfall, I would be completely cut off from the outside world, and the skinwalker would return. The storm arrived with savage intensity just after sunset, bringing howling winds and snow so thick it erased the world beyond my windows. The lake, the forest, the mountains, all vanished behind a wall of white. Under different circumstances, I might have found the isolation peaceful. Now it felt like a shroud. I moved methodically through the cabin, checking and reinforcing the protective measures Thomas had described. The symbols I'd drawn seemed to be working. The oppressive sense of dread that had permeated the cabin the previous night was lessened, though not entirely gone. According to Thomas, the final step of the binding ritual required me to confront the creature directly. I needed to call it by its true nature while holding specific items, a mirror to reflect its real form back at it, and a pouch containing a mixture of the sacred herbs combined with something of myself. A few strands of hair, nail clippings, 3 drops of my own blood. The binding won't destroy it, Thomas had explained. Nothing can, but it will break its connection to you specifically. It will be forced to seek easier prey. The thought of driving this thing towards someone else troubled me deeply, but the alternative was worse. If I failed, I wouldn't simply die. The skinwalker would consume something more essential than my flesh, my spirit, my very self. As I made the final preparations, mixing my blood with the herbs as instructed, I found myself wondering about the history of this place. What had happened here to create such a thin spot between worlds? What ancient taboo had been broken, as my professor had suggested? The wind screamed around the eaves of the cabin, a sound so similar to the skinwalker's laughter that I jumped each time it reached a crescendo. The temperature continued to drop. The wood stove struggled against the cold, the flames flickering as if something were stealing their heat. At midnight, I positioned myself in the center of the stone circle I'd laid out, the mirror in one hand, the pouch in the other. According to Thomas, I needed to call it 3 times, inviting it to show itself. My voice shook as I spoke the words he had taught me, an invitation in an ancient dialect of Athabascan that I barely understood. I repeated the phrase 3 times, each repetition a little stronger than the last. The storm outside seemed to pause. The howling wind died away suddenly, leaving an unnatural silence. Even the crackling of the fire seemed muted, as if sound itself were being suppressed. And then I felt it, a presence, not outside the cabin now, but inside. Though I could see nothing, I knew with certainty that the skinwalker had entered. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe. The shadows in the corners deepened and seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "Show yourself," I commanded, raising the mirror. Laughter rippled through the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Brave Ahanu," it said, its voice changing as it spoke, shifting between tones and timbres. Sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes neither. "You think your little trinkets and circles will save you? Greater men than you have tried. Show yourself," I repeated. "By the power of my blood and name, I command you to reveal your true form." The shadows coalesced, gathering in front of me just beyond the circle of stones. They twisted and writhed, gradually taking shape. The same terrible hybrid I'd glimpsed through the window the night before, but clearer now. The wolf skin hung loosely on a frame that was fundamentally wrong, too tall, too thin, with joints that bent in impossible directions. Its face was the most horrifying aspect. A wolf's head with 2 human eyes, intelligence and malice burning within them. The jaws were longer than they should be, filled with teeth that seemed to shift and multiply as I watched. "I see you," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I know what you are, do you?" it asked, circling the stone perimeter slowly. "I think not. I am older than your language has words for. I walked these lands when your ancestors were still learning to make fire." It stopped directly in front of me, lowering its misshapen head to stare into my eyes. "I've tasted your fear, Ahanu Black. It's exquisite, so much better than the others who've come before. They broke so quickly, gave in so easily. It made a sound like smacking lips. But you have fight in you, old blood. It makes the feast so much more satisfying." I raised the mirror, angling it so the creature could see its reflection. "By my name and blood I bind you," I began, reciting the words Thomas had taught me. The skinwalker snarled, reaching toward me but stopping just short of the stone circle. Its claws scraped against some invisible barrier. "Fool," it hissed. "You think you're the first to try such tactics? I've broken stronger circles than this. I've devoured better men than you." Despite its bravado, I could see the reflection in the mirror was causing it discomfort. In the glass, its form was even more unstable, shifting rapidly between shapes. Wolf, man, something insectoid. Something reptilian, as if it couldn't maintain a consistent appearance when forced to confront its own image. I continued the ritual, my voice growing stronger with each word. The mixture of herbs and blood in the pouch grew warm in my hand, almost hot. The skinwalker's attacks grew more desperate. It began to change tactics, its form blurring and reshaping. "Ahanu," it said, but now in my mother's voice. "Baby, please stop this. You're hurting me." I faltered for a moment, seeing my mother's face superimposed over the creature's form. "You left me alone," it continued in her voice. "Just like your father did. And now you're trying to send me away too?" I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself. "You're not her," I said firmly. "You're nothing but a thief of forms and voices." I resumed the ritual, The creature shrieked in frustration, its stolen voice cracking and revealing the inhuman sound beneath. It tried again, taking the appearance of my ex-fiancé, pleading, then threatening. When that failed, it cycled through other forms, people from my past, figures from my nightmares, beasts from legend. With each transformation, I continued the binding, growing more confident as I saw the effect it was having. The skinwalker's movements became jerky, less coordinated. The air in the cabin grew warmer, the oppressive feeling lifting. Finally, as I spoke the last words of the ritual, I opened the pouch and cast its contents at the creature. The mixture of herbs and blood scattered across the invisible barrier of the circle, briefly illuminating it with a pale blue light. The skinwalker let out a sound I can only describe as the audio equivalent of watching something inside out itself. A wrenching, tearing noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Its form convulsed, contracted, and then exploded into a cloud of darkness that dissipated like smoke. The storm outside resumed instantly, the wind howling with renewed fury. But inside the cabin, the atmosphere had changed completely. The shadows were just shadows again. The air was easier to breathe. I collapsed to my knees, exhausted beyond measure. Had it worked? Was the creature truly bound, its connection to me severed? I didn't have long to wonder. A sound from outside caught my attention. The distant growl of a snowmobile engine, barely audible over the storm. Confused, I checked my watch. It was nearly 3 a.m. Who would be out in this weather, at this hour? The engine sound grew louder, then cut off nearby. Moments later, a pounding at my door. Ahanu, open up. It's Marcus. I approached cautiously, gun in hand. Marcus? What are you doing here? The storm hit earlier than expected. My snowmobile's almost out of fuel. I need shelter. Something felt wrong. Marcus knew better than to travel in a blizzard, and he would have radioed ahead. Ahanu, please. I'm freezing out here. I stood silently by the door, not moving, not responding. Let me in, Ahanu, the voice said, changing subtly. Let me in or I'll find another way. It wasn't Marcus. The binding hadn't banished the skinwalker, it had only forced it outside again. No, I said firmly. You have no power over me now, no claim to my name or my spirit. Go, find other prey. A howl of rage answered me, and something heavy slammed against the door, making the hinges creak. But the barrier held. This isn't over, the false Marcus hissed. This is my territory, my hunting ground. You're the intruder here. Go, I repeated. Another howl, fading into the storm. The sound of the snowmobile engine revved up again, growing distant until it was swallowed by the blizzard. I spent the remainder of the night awake, vigilant, but no further attacks came. As dawn approached and the storm finally began to subside, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps the binding had worked after all, not by banishing the creature entirely, but by severing its specific connection to me, making me too difficult to target when easier prey might be found elsewhere. The thought brought little comfort. If not me, then who? Who else might find themselves stalked by this ancient predator? As I watched the sunrise break over the freshly fallen snow, turning the landscape into a glittering wonderland, I made a decision. I couldn't leave this place knowing what lurked in its shadows. I couldn't pass this burden to someone else, someone who might not have the knowledge or the heritage to defend themselves. The skinwalker had called this its territory, its hunting ground. Perhaps it was time someone challenged that claim. Spring came reluctantly to Wonder Lake. The winter had been brutal, with storm after storm burying the landscape under feet of snow, but gradually, inexorably, the days lengthened. The ice on the lake began to crack and recede. Green shoots pushed through the melting snowpack. I remained at my post. After the binding ritual, the skinwalker's direct attack ceased, but I knew it was still out there. Occasionally I would catch glimpses of it at the forest's edge, a shape that was almost but not quite wolf, watching the cabin with unnerving patience. It was waiting. For what, I wasn't sure. My reports to park headquarters were deliberately vague. I documented unusual wildlife activity, strange tracks, unexplained noises, but I said nothing of skinwalkers or binding rituals. Such things had no place in official records, and speaking of them would likely earn me a psychological evaluation and a transfer. I spoke with Thomas in Fairbanks several times by phone. He wasn't surprised that the binding hadn't fully banished the creature. It's too old, too powerful for that, he explained. What you did was protect yourself, mark yourself as too difficult a target. But it won't leave its hunting ground, not while there's prey to be had. Then what's the solution? I asked. I can't let it keep hunting people. There was a long silence before Thomas answered. There is a way. Not to destroy it. Nothing can do that. But to trap it, bind it not just from one person, but from all people. Lock it away where it can't hunt. How? It's dangerous, Ahanu. More dangerous than what you've already done. It would require a binding circle much larger than the one in your cabin. And it would need bait. Me, I said, understanding immediately. Yes. You would have to lure it to the center of the circle and spring the trap, knowing you might not escape yourself. The idea terrified me. But as spring advanced and the park prepared for the influx of summer visitors, hikers, campers, families with children, I knew I couldn't allow the skinwalker to remain free. I spent weeks preparing. Thomas sent detailed instructions and rare materials via park supply drops. I scouted locations, eventually settling on a small island in Wonder Lake, a natural containment that would strengthen the binding. When everything was ready, I chose my moment carefully. The summer solstice, when Thomas said the boundary between worlds would be at its thinnest, making the binding more powerful but also making the skinwalker stronger. The night before, I radioed Marcus. If you don't hear from me by tomorrow night, something's wrong, I told him. Check the island in Wonder Lake, but be careful, don't cross to the island itself. Ahanu, what are you planning? His voice was thick with concern. Just trust me, and if I don't make it, tell headquarters there was an accident. Nothing supernatural, nothing that would make them doubt the report. Damn it, man. I cut the connection. Explanations would only lead to interference, and I couldn't risk anyone else getting involved. The day of the solstice dawned clear and warm. I spent the morning making final preparations, laying out the massive binding circle on the island using the grandfather stones, drawing symbols in a mixture of clay and my own blood, burying protective talismans at strategic points. By afternoon, everything was ready. All that remained was to summon the skinwalker and lure it to the center of the trap. I took a small boat to the island at dusk, carrying only what I needed for the ritual. As the sun set, painting the lake with gold and crimson, I stood at the center of the circle and began the summoning chant Thomas had taught me. Unlike the previous ritual, this one was not in Athabascan but in something far older, the words feeling strange and almost painful in my mouth. The air grew heavy as I chanted, the light taking on an amber quality that made shadows seem deeper, more solid. I finished the chant and waited, the silence absolute. No birds called, no insects chirped. Even the gentle lapping of water against the shore had ceased, as if the lake itself were holding its breath. Then I heard it, the sound of something large moving through the underbrush on the mainland shore. I turned to see the skinwalker emerge from the tree line, its form more solid and defined than I'd ever seen it. In the golden light of the setting sun, it appeared almost majestic in its wrongness, a perfect predator from a world adjacent to our own. It stared at me across the narrow channel of water, head tilted in what might have been curiosity. So, it said, its voice carrying easily across the water, the hunter becomes the hunted. Come and get me, I challenged. Or are you afraid? It made that terrible laughing sound. Afraid? Of you? You've learned a few tricks, little ranger, but you remain meat and bone and blood. I am beyond such fragility. Prove it, I taunted. The skinwalker paced the shoreline, studying the island, sniffing the air. I could sense its suspicion, its awareness that this might be a trap. But I also saw its hunger, a hunger not just for flesh but for the fear and suffering of its prey, a hunger it couldn't resist. With a fluid motion that defied the laws of physics, it leapt into the water. But rather than swimming, it seemed to skim across the surface, reaching the island in seconds. This was the moment of greatest danger. I needed it to cross the boundary of the circle, but I had to remain inside myself to complete the binding. The skinwalker prowled the perimeter of the island, testing, searching. I could feel its ancient intelligence assessing the situation, looking for the trap it knew must exist. I know what you're trying to do, it said at last. Others have tried before. Their bones lie beneath this lake, beneath this forest. Then you have nothing to fear, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. It approached the edge of the invisible circle, hesitating. I held my breath. Then, with deliberate slowness, it stepped across the boundary. I felt the circle activate, a surge of energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. The skinwalker felt it too. Its form rippled, momentarily losing cohesion. It snarled and lunged toward me. I began the binding chant, the words tumbling from my lips as I backed away, trying to maintain distance without leaving the circle myself. The skinwalker's attacks grew more frenzied as the binding took effect. It shifted forms rapidly: wolf, man, bear, things with too many limbs or eyes or mouths. It screamed in a dozen voices, hurled itself against the barrier that was slowly contracting, driving it toward the center of the island. I continued the chant, even as the creature's claws raked my arm, drawing blood. The pain was intense, but I couldn't stop. If the chant was broken before completion, the binding would fail. As I spoke the final words, I threw the binding pouch directly at the skinwalker. It exploded in a flash of blue-white light, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, the creature was contained within a sphere of the same light, its form blurring and distorting as if viewed through rippling water. "What have you done?" it howled, its voice muffled by the barrier. "Bound you," I gasped, clutching my wounded arm. "To this place. Forever." The binding hadn't gone exactly as planned. I'd hoped to trap it beneath the island, deep in the earth. Instead, it remained visible, contained but still present. And the barrier, it wasn't as solid as it should have been. I could see fluctuations, moments of weakness. The skinwalker saw them too. It pressed against these spots, testing, searching for a way out. I stumbled back to my boat, knowing I needed to get help to reinforce the binding before it failed completely. But as I pushed off from shore, the skinwalker's voice reached me one last time. "This prison won't hold me forever, Ahanu Black, and when I escape, I will find you. Wherever you go, whatever you become, I will know you. And I will take from you everything you love before I finally take you." I rowed back to the mainland as quickly as my injured arm allowed, not looking back at the imprisoned creature. By the time I reached my cabin, night had fallen completely. I radioed Marcus, telling him the threat was contained but not eliminated, that the island was now strictly off-limits to everyone. That was 5 years ago. I still serve as a ranger at Wonder Lake, though now I'm not alone. After what happened, the Park Service decided the location warranted year-round staffing. My new cabin is larger, more comfortable, with better communications equipment and regular supply deliveries. To my colleagues, I'm something of an oddity. The ranger who chooses to stay in a remote outpost year after year when he could request transfer to more comfortable locations. They don't understand that I can't leave, that I'm as bound to this place as the creature trapped on the island. The binding holds, but it weakens with each passing year. I can feel it. Sometimes, when the wind is right, I hear the skinwalker's voice carried across the water. Whispering, promising, threatening, visitors occasionally report strange sightings on the island, a large wolf standing on its hind legs, a tall figure watching from among the trees. I file their reports and add warnings about approaching the island to our standard safety briefings. At night, I often stand by the lakeshore, watching the island. And sometimes, I see it watching back. A darker shadow among the trees, eyes reflecting the moonlight with an unnatural gleam. We are watchers, the skinwalker and I. It watches for weakness in its prison. I watch for signs of its escape, and I know that someday, perhaps soon, the binding will fail. The prison will break. And when that happens, I'll be waiting. Not running, not hiding, but facing it as my ancestors did. With knowledge, with courage, and with the understanding that some battles can never truly be won, only fought again and again across the generations. Until then, I remain at my post. A ranger, a guardian, a watcher in the wilderness. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the northern lights dance across the sky and the wind whispers through the trees, I stand outside my cabin and laugh. A sound of defiance, of life, of humanity. I laugh because that's what my name commands, Ahanu. He laughs, and in those moments I feel the skinwalker's rage burning across the water, impotent against the simple human joy that it can never possess, never understand, and never destroy. So I watch, and I wait, and I laugh. My name is Ahanu. It means he laughs in Algonquin, though I haven't done much laughing lately. Not since taking this job at Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska 3 years ago. I live alone in a ranger cabin that sits on the edge of Mirror Lake, about 18 miles from the nearest town. The structure is simple: 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a living area with a wood stove, and a bathroom with plumbing that works most days. The Park Service built it in the 1950s, and while they've updated parts over the decades, it still feels like stepping into another era when I close the door against the wilderness. People always ask why I chose this life. The isolation, the danger, the endless responsibilities with minimal pay. I usually give them some line about loving nature or wanting to protect the environment. Both true, but not the whole truth. I took this job because I was running from debt. 6 figures of it, to be exact. Most from medical bills after my father's cancer ate through our family's savings before it ate through him. Some from a failed attempt at graduate school where I studied indigenous folklore, a passion that provided exactly 0 career prospects. The Park Service offered a steady paycheck, housing, and most importantly, distance from the collection agencies that hounded me in Seattle. What I didn't anticipate was how much I'd come to love this place. The vastness of it, the silence, the way the northern lights dance across the sky in winter like spirits performing for anyone brave enough to endure the cold. I love the rhythm of the seasons, the frantic energy of summer with its tourists and midnight sun giving way to the slow, introspective darkness of winter. That's not to say it's easy. Search and rescue operations in sub-zero temperatures, confronting poachers who aren't afraid to threaten a federal officer, maintaining communication when storms knock out power for days. I've pulled hypothermic hikers from icy waters and tracked lost children through dense forest. I've treated wounds, set broken bones, and once delivered a baby in a camper van during a blizzard. But nothing prepared me for what happened last winter. It began with tracks in the snow. Human-like but wrong somehow. Too long. Toes splayed unnaturally. I found them circling my cabin one morning in December, after a night when the temperature dropped to 30 below and something had scratched at my windows for hours. I'd heard stories from local Denia elders about creatures that walk between worlds. Skinwalkers, some call them, though that term comes from Navajo tradition. The Denia have their own names for such beings, names they're reluctant to speak aloud. I dismissed the tracks as belonging to a large wolf, or perhaps a bear that hadn't bedded down for winter. Even as I convinced myself of rational explanations, I added extra logs to the wood stove and checked the locks twice. That evening, my radio crackled to life. A distress call from hikers stranded by an early blizzard near Eagle Peak. The coordinates put them about 4 miles from my cabin. Park protocol dictated I wait for backup, but the storm was intensifying and temperatures were dropping fast. They wouldn't survive the night without shelter. I gathered my emergency pack, strapped on snowshoes, and stepped into the swirling darkness, my headlamp cutting a feeble path through the falling snow. I didn't notice the silence until I was a mile from the cabin, the complete absence of wind or animal sounds, despite the storm, and I didn't notice I was being followed until I saw the second set of tracks appearing behind me, those same wrongly shaped footprints, materializing in snow that had been pristine moments before. The blizzard intensified as I pushed deeper into the forest. Wind howled through the pines, snow blinding me despite my headlamp and goggles. My radio crackled with static. Backup was trying to reach me, but their words dissolved into white noise. I was on my own. I checked my GPS again. The hiker's last known location was just half a mile ahead. As I trudged forward, the weight of my emergency pack digging into my shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I turned around repeatedly, my headlamp sweeping across the darkness behind me. Nothing but falling snow and those tracks, those impossible tracks that seemed to appear from nowhere. The storm momentarily subsided, and in that brief silence I heard it. A sound like branches breaking but rhythmic. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, circling to my left, just beyond the reach of my light. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the snow. "Park Service. Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Then from the darkness came a sound that froze my blood. A perfect imitation of my own voice repeating my words back to me, but distorted, stretched out like audio played at the wrong speed. My hand moved to the bear spray on my belt. Useless, probably, but its weight was reassuring. I pushed forward, focusing on the coordinates. The hikers had to be my priority. Whatever was following me could wait. 20 minutes later, I spotted their tent, a bright blue dome nearly buried in snow. 2 college students from Anchorage, a boyfriend and girlfriend who'd ignored weather advisories for a weekend adventure. The girl had fallen and injured her ankle, making evacuation impossible without assistance. "We heard you coming for the last 10 minutes, the boy said, his face pale with cold and fear. "Sounded like you were calling for help." I felt my skin prickle. "I didn't call out. Someone did," the girl insisted, clutching her swollen ankle. "They were saying, 'Help me,' over and over. We thought it was you." I helped splint her ankle and gave them both warming packs for their clothes. The temperature was dropping rapidly. We needed shelter immediately. My cabin was closer than the trailhead. I made the decision quickly. "We're heading to my ranger station," I told them. "It's about 3 miles. Can you make it?" The boy nodded, but the girl looked doubtful. I fashioned a makeshift sled from their tent and some branches, creating something she could sit on while we pulled. As we left their campsite, the boy grabbed my arm. "What's that?" he whispered, pointing into the darkness. At the edge of my headlamp's beam stood a figure, tall, impossibly thin, its proportions wrong in ways my mind struggled to process. It stood perfectly still against the falling snow. "It's just a tree," I said, though I knew it wasn't. We moved as quickly as possible through the deepening snow, the sled slowing our progress. I kept my headlamp pointed forward, refusing to look for what might be following us. The girl whimpered occasionally from pain or fear, perhaps both. About a mile from my cabin, the boy stopped suddenly. "I hear my mother," he said, his voice distant, dreamlike. "Your mother isn't here," I said firmly, grabbing his arm. "It's the wind or the cold affecting your mind. She's calling me," he insisted, trying to pull away. "I need to go to her," the girl screamed then, not from the sled where I'd left her, but from somewhere in the darkness to our right. Yet when I swung around, she was still there on the sled, staring at me in confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked. Before I could answer, her scream echoed again from the forest, identical to the first. "Don't listen," I ordered them both. "Whatever you hear, it's not real." We pushed forward, and I began to talk loudly, continuously, about the weather, park regulations, anything to drown out the sounds around us. Behind us, what sounded like a crowd of voices began to call our names, using tones of loved ones, friends, people who couldn't possibly be in these woods. When my cabin finally came into view, I nearly collapsed with relief. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and hurried the hikers inside, securing all locks and windows before finally allowing myself to breathe. The girl was hypothermic, the boy in the early stages of frostbite. I stoked the wood stove to blazing, prepared hot drinks, and set up emergency blankets. Only when they were warming did I look out the window. A circle of those misshapen footprints surrounded my cabin, and at the edge of the trees stood multiple figures, their forms obscured by falling snow, watching with patient, hungry attention. The storm raged for 3 days. Cell service was non-existent, and my radio picked up nothing but static, punctuated occasionally by voices that sounded almost human but spoke words that made no sense. The backup I'd requested never arrived, likely turned back by the blizzard. Inside the cabin, tensions rose with the temperature. The hikers, Jason and Mira, alternated between gratitude for the rescue and restless anxiety at being trapped. Mira's ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, and though I'm trained in wilderness first aid, I worried about complications. "We need to leave," Jason insisted on the morning of the third day, peering through the frost-covered windows. "As soon as the storm breaks." I didn't tell him what I'd seen each night since our arrival. How the figures moved closer to the cabin after dark. How they tested the windows and doors with long, slender fingers that left frost patterns like burn marks on the glass. How they called out in voices that mimicked each of ours with perfect, terrible accuracy. "The next ranger station is 20 miles away," I explained instead. "Mira can't walk, and the snow's 4 feet deep in places. We wait for help." But as the day wore on, Mira developed a fever. Her ankle had red streaks running upward, signs of infection. She needed medical attention soon. That night, as my guests slept fitfully in the bedroom I'd given them, I sat by the wood stove with my father's old shotgun across my lap. I hadn't told them about it, didn't want to frighten them more than necessary, but I'd loaded it with the few shells I kept for emergencies. Just after midnight, the scratching began. At first, it sounded like branches against the roof, easily explained by the wind, but it grew more deliberate, moving from the ceiling to the walls to the door. Slow, methodical scrapes that made the wooden cabin shudder. Then came the voices. "Ahanu," they called softly. "Let us in. We're so cold." The voices shifted, becoming my father's weak, cancer-ravaged tone. "Son, why won't you help me? I'm in pain." I gripped the shotgun tighter, knowing the sound wasn't really my father, who'd died in a Seattle hospital bed 3 years ago while I held his hand. "It's getting worse," Jason's voice came from the bedroom doorway. He stood there pale and trembling, clearly having heard the same things I had. "What are they?" I motioned him to sit by the fire. "Something that doesn't belong here," I said. "Something that's learned to hunt by mimicry." "You know what they are," he pressed. I hesitated. During my indigenous folklore studies, I'd researched similar creatures from various tribal traditions. The Navajo skinwalkers, the Algonquian Wendigo, the various shape-shifting entities the Dena'ina people warned about in their oral histories. "The locals call them Nantina," I finally said. "It means that which wears another's skin. They're not fully explained by science." Jason laughed bitterly. "No shit." Outside, something heavy thudded against the door. The wooden frame creaked ominously. "Will it hold?" Jason whispered. Before I could answer, Mira screamed from the bedroom. We rushed in to find her sitting upright, eyes wide with terror. "Something's under the bed," she gasped. Jason knelt beside her while I aimed the shotgun at the space between the bed frame and floor. Slowly, I crouched down to look. Nothing was there. "I heard it breathing," Mira insisted, tears streaming down her fever-flushed face. "It was saying my name." I checked every corner of the room, then returned to Mira's side to examine her ankle. The infection was visibly worse, the skin hot and tight. "We need to radio for emergency evacuation at first light," I told them. Storm or no storm, back in the main room, I tried the radio again. Through the static, I finally heard a response. "Copy, location, status. 3 people at Mirror Lake Cabin," I practically shouted. "Medical emergency. Request immediate evacuation." The response came through clearer this time, but what I heard made no sense. "Ahanu, why did you leave us in the snow? We're still waiting for you. Come back to the woods." I dropped the radio as if it had burned me. It continued to speak with Mira's voice, then Jason's, then my own, all saying terrible, pleading things. Dawn seemed an eternity away. The scratching continued, moving methodically around the cabin like something testing for weaknesses. Occasionally, we heard heavy footsteps on the roof. The temperature inside the cabin dropped steadily despite the roaring fire, our breath becoming visible. In the coldest hour before sunrise, the window in the kitchen shattered inward. Glass sprayed across the floor as icy air rushed in. Something reached through the opening, a limb too long and jointed in too many places to be human, its skin a patchwork of different textures and colors. I fired the shotgun without hesitation. The blast was deafening in the small cabin, but the limb merely withdrew, unharmed. I rushed to barricade the window with a bookshelf, shoving it against the broken glass as Jason helped. When we finished, I turned to see Mira standing in the bedroom doorway. Her fever-bright eyes looked strangely calm. "They just want to help," she said, her voice flat. "They told me they can make the pain stop." Jason moved toward her, but I caught his arm. "When did they tell you that?" I asked carefully. "Just now," she replied. "They're speaking inside my head. They say they're cold and need warmth. They need—" She hesitated, looking confused. "Skin." Dawn broke reluctantly, pale light filtering through the storm clouds. The scratching had stopped an hour earlier, and Mira had finally fallen into a fitful sleep after I gave her the strongest painkillers from my first aid kit. Her fever still raged. Jason hadn't slept at all. He sat by the window staring into the snowy landscape. "There's nothing out there now," he reported. "No tracks, no figures." I nodded, though I knew better. They hadn't left. They were simply waiting. The Nantina were patient predators. My radio crackled to life suddenly, making us both jump. This time, the voice that came through sounded official, professional, a genuine transmission. "Mirror Lake Cabin. This is Ranger Dispatch. Do you copy?" My hands shook as I grabbed the handset. "This is Ranger Ahanu at Mirror Lake. We have 3 people here, one with a severe infection. Request immediate medical evacuation." "Copy that, Mirror Lake. Weather's clearing. Helicopter dispatched from Seward, ETA 2 hours. Can your patient hold out?" I glanced toward the bedroom where Mira lay. "Affirmative, but please hurry." "Roger that. Stay by your radio." For the first time in days, I felt genuine hope. If we could hold on for just 2 more hours, help would arrive. Jason seemed to brighten as well. "I'm going to check on Mira," he said, moving toward the bedroom. I used the moment alone to assess our situation. The broken kitchen window remained barricaded, but cold air still seeped through. Our firewood supply was dwindling, and we'd used most of the emergency food I kept stored. Most concerning was the silence outside. No wind, no birds, no natural sounds at all. From the bedroom, I heard Jason cry out. I grabbed the shotgun and rushed in to find him standing over the bed, his face ashen. "She's gone," he said. The bed was empty, the sheets thrown back. The window beside it was wide open, snow drifting onto the floor. "I closed that window," I said, moving toward it. "I checked all the windows after the kitchen broke." Jason just stared at the empty bed. "How did she get up?" "Her ankle was too swollen to walk." Outside the window, a set of footprints led from the cabin into the forest. Single footprints, as if Mira had hopped on one foot. "We have to find her," Jason said, already pulling on his coat. I grabbed his arm. "Think about this. She couldn't walk. Those tracks don't make sense." "I don't care. She's out there in the cold, delirious with fever, or something carried her," I said, voicing the fear that had formed in my mind. Something that wanted us to follow the tracks. Jason stared at me, his expression hardening. "What are you saying? That we just leave her out there to die?" I took a deep breath. "Help is coming in 2 hours. If we go out now, we might all die before they arrive." These things, they're trying to separate us. You don't know that. I know more than you think, I insisted. I've studied the stories. I've seen what happens to people who go into these woods when the Nantina are hunting. He pulled away from me. Stories. Folklore. Meanwhile, Mira is actually missing. Before I could respond, we heard it. Mira's voice, calling from the trees. Jason, help me! I'm lost! Jason moved toward the window, but I blocked him. That's not her. Jason, please! The voice called again. This time sounding weak, frightened. I'm cold. I can't feel my legs. Get out of my way, Jason growled. I raised the shotgun. I can't let you go out there. For a moment, I thought he might fight me, but then his shoulders slumped. So we just wait? While she's out there suffering? We wait for the helicopter, I said firmly. Then we search for her with proper backup. I closed and secured the bedroom window, then led Jason back to the main room. The radio remained silent, but I took comfort in knowing help was on the way. As we waited, the calls from the forest continued. Sometimes Mira's voice, sometimes others, including voices that sounded like people Jason knew from his life, calling his name, begging for help. They can read our memories somehow, I explained, trying to keep him grounded. They find the voices that will affect us most. Why are they doing this? He asked, his face haggard with stress and lack of sleep. I hesitated, not wanting to frighten him further, but he deserved the truth. According to the Dena'ina elders, the Nantina were once human, I said. People who became lost in the wilderness and made terrible choices to survive. Now they're neither human nor animal, but something in between. They're always cold, always hungry, and they need the warmth of others to survive the winter. You mean they eat people? They consume more than just flesh, I said quietly. The elders say they take your essence, your spirit. They wear your form to lure others. Jason stared into the fire. So Mira is... We don't know that, I interrupted. She might have wandered off in her fever. We'll search as soon as help arrives. An hour passed. The radio remained silent despite my repeated attempts to contact dispatch. Outside, the voices had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Then we heard the distant thrum of helicopter blades. They're early, Jason exclaimed, rushing to the window. Relief flooded through me as I moved to join him. Through the trees, I could see the helicopter approaching, its shape growing larger against the gray sky. Then it stopped, hovering about half a mile away. Even from this distance, something seemed wrong about its movements. Too jerky, unnatural. The radio crackled again. Mirror Lake Cabin, we see you. Please step outside to guide our landing. The voice sounded professional, but something about it raised the hairs on the back of my neck. This is Mirror Lake, I responded cautiously. I don't see a suitable landing zone near the cabin. Please advise. Step outside, Ranger Ahanu, the voice repeated, with subtle emphasis on my name. We need visual confirmation of your position. I glanced at Jason, who was already putting on his snow boots. Help is here, he said, relief evident in his voice. I grabbed his shoulder. Wait, reaching for the binoculars I kept by the window, I trained them on the distant helicopter. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a helicopter at all. The shape against the sky was wrong, elongated, with appendages that moved independently. Even as I watched, parts of it seemed to shift and change. The steady thrum of blades continued, but it came from all around us, not from the thing in the sky. That's not our rescue, I whispered, backing away from the window. What do you mean it's not our rescue? Jason demanded, grabbing the binoculars from me. He stared for several long seconds before slowly lowering them, his face drained of color. What the hell is that thing? Something pretending to be a helicopter, I said, checking my shotgun again. Something that wants us to leave the cabin. The radio crackled once more. Mirror Lake Cabin, please acknowledge. We cannot land without your guidance. I ignored it, moving methodically through the cabin to secure every possible entrance. The barricaded kitchen window, the front door reinforced with the dining table, the bedroom window now locked and blocked with a dresser. We stay inside, I told Jason. No matter what we hear or see. The sound of rotors grew louder, seeming to approach the cabin, then circle it. The walls vibrated with the noise. Through the windows, a shadow passed overhead, too large and misshapen to be a real helicopter. Then, abruptly, the sound stopped. In the silence that followed, my radio hissed with static before a new voice came through. The clear, professional tone of an actual rescue worker. Mirror Lake Cabin, this is Air Rescue Actual. Weather conditions have deteriorated at our location. Evacuation delayed by approximately 4 hours. Please confirm receipt of this message. My hands shook as I responded. Confirmed. Air rescue. Will maintain position. What does that mean? Jason asked, his voice thin with stress. The weather looks clearer now. It means whatever's out there tried to trick us, I said. And when that didn't work, they might try something else. We didn't have to wait long to find out what that something else would be. The scratching began again, not just at one spot, but everywhere. Walls, roof, windows, door. As if dozens of creatures surrounded the cabin. The wood groaned under some immense pressure. Then, from the bedroom, came Mira's voice. Not calling from outside this time, but speaking as if she were in the cabin with us. Jason? Ahanu? Where are you guys? Jason leapt to his feet, but I grabbed him before he could run toward the voice. She's not there, I insisted. We checked that room 10 minutes ago. Then what's making her voice? He demanded. Before I could answer, the bedroom door swung open. Mira stood in the doorway, but something was terribly wrong with her appearance. Her skin seemed too tight in some places, too loose in others. Her movements were jerky, mechanical, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. I got lost, she said, her voice perfect but her mouth movements slightly off sync with the words. But I found my way back. Jason stared, frozen between relief and horror. Mira? She took a step forward, and I noticed that she was walking normally, putting weight on the ankle that had been grotesquely swollen hours earlier. Don't, I warned Jason, raising the shotgun. That's not her. The thing wearing Mira's form cocked its head at an impossible angle. Of course it's me, it said, the voice still perfectly Mira's, but now underlaid with something else, a whisper that echoed each word. I'm just cold, so cold. Can I sit by the fire? Where were you? I demanded, keeping the shotgun trained on it. How did your ankle heal? It smiled, the expression spreading too wide across Mira's face. The people in the woods helped me. They can help you too, if you come outside. People? Jason whispered. What people? The thing's attention snapped to him. Its movements suddenly more fluid, more convincing. Oh, Jason, it said, its voice softening. I was so scared without you. Please, I need to warm up. It held out Mira's hands, which now appeared bluish with cold. Jason took a half step toward it before I blocked his path. That is not Mira, I said firmly. The real Mira couldn't walk on that ankle. The creature's expression changed, flickering between emotions too quickly to be human. You always were too smart, Ahanu, it said, its voice deepening, distorting. The others are usually easier to fool. Others? Jason asked, backing away now. What others? The thing smiled again, and this time its teeth seemed too numerous, too sharp. The lost ones. The ones who come to these woods and never leave, like you will be. It lunged forward suddenly, moving with impossible speed. I fired the shotgun, the blast deafening in the confined space. The creature was thrown backward, crashing into the bedroom wall. Where the buckshot had torn through Mira's jacket, there was no blood, only a strange, mottled tissue that writhed and pulsed. Run! I shouted to Jason, already moving toward the front door. The barricade we'd created would take too long to move. The window in my office. We sprinted down the short hallway to the small room I used for paperwork. Its window was small but large enough to climb through. As I struggled to open it, frozen shut from disuse, I heard the thing recovering, its movements a series of wet, cracking sounds like breaking ice. It's not human, Jason gasped, helping me force the window open. What did we do to Mira? We didn't do anything, I insisted. That thing took her form, but it isn't her. The real Mira is still out there somewhere. The window finally gave way with a screech of old wood. Cold air rushed in as I cleared the frame of ice. You go first, I told Jason, reloading the shotgun with my last shells. I'll cover you. He hesitated only briefly before climbing through. I heard him land in the snow outside with a soft thud. From the hallway came sounds of the creature approaching. A strange sliding gait punctuated by cracking joints. I raised the shotgun, aimed at the office doorway, and waited. The thing that had been wearing Mira's form appeared, but it had partly abandoned its disguise. Mira's face remained but distorted, stretched over a frame that was now much taller. Its limbs had elongated, joints bending in impossible directions. Where I had shot it, the wound gaped open to reveal not organs but a writhing mass of what looked like small, worm-like appendages. Don't leave, Ahanu, it said, still using Mira's voice. We've been watching you for so long. We know what you fear, what you love, what you've lost. I fired again, aiming for what passed as its head. The blast tore away half of Mira's face, revealing beneath it something ancient and inhuman. Eyes too large and numerous, flesh that seemed to shift and change as I watched. Without waiting to see more, I turned and climbed through the window, dropping into the snow beside Jason. "Run for the helicopter landing zone," I ordered. "It's a mile east, in the clearing by the lake." We sprinted through the snow, the early afternoon sun providing just enough light to see our way. Behind us, the creature emerged from the cabin, no longer bothering with its human disguise, its true form too bizarre for my mind to fully comprehend. Long limbs, multiple joints, a body that seemed to ripple and change as it moved. Worse still, from the surrounding forest, other figures began to emerge, some partially human-shaped, others completely alien. They converged on our position with methodical purpose. "Don't look back," I gasped to Jason as we ran. "Just keep moving." The clearing was just ahead, the frozen surface of Mirror Lake visible through the trees. If we could reach open ground, the helicopter might spot us when it arrived. If it arrived, as we burst from the tree line, I saw something that made me skid to a halt. Across the clearing, standing perfectly still in the snow, was a figure, Mira. The real Mira, her ankle still swollen, her face pale with cold but undeniably human. She seemed dazed, confused. "Mira!" Jason shouted, changing direction to run toward her. "Wait!" I called, but he was already halfway across the clearing. I followed, watching in horror as the distance between them closed. Something was wrong. Mira wasn't reacting to Jason's approach. She just stood there, swaying slightly, her eyes unfocused. Then I saw the tracks leading to where she stood. A single line of footprints. As if she had hopped on one foot all the way from the cabin, through the forest, to this exact spot, which was impossible. "Jason, stop!" I shouted, raising the shotgun. He turned toward me, confusion on his face, just as he reached Mira. "What's wrong?" "The tracks," I said, approaching slowly. "She couldn't have made those tracks." Jason looked down at the snow around Mira's feet, then back at me, realization dawning on his face. Mira's vacant expression suddenly changed, a smile spreading across her features. Too wide, too knowing. "You're too late," she said, but the voice wasn't hers. It was ancient, multi-layered, as if many voices spoke at once. "He's already touched her." I looked down and saw that Jason's hand was clasped in Mira's. Where their skin met, a strange discoloration was spreading up his arm, not frostbite, but something else. Something that pulsed and moved beneath his skin. "Let go!" I shouted, raising the shotgun. "Jason, let go of her hand!" Jason looked down at where his fingers intertwined with Mira's. Horror dawned on his face as he saw the strange, mottled pattern creeping up his arm. He tried to pull away, but his hand wouldn't respond. "I can't," he gasped. "I can't move my arm." The thing wearing Mira's form smiled, the expression spreading impossibly wide across her face. "He's joining us," it said in that ancient, multi-layered voice. As she did, "As you will." From the surrounding forest, the other creatures had emerged fully now. Some still maintained partial human disguises, faces stretched over inhuman frames, limbs of mismatched proportions. Others had abandoned pretense entirely, their true forms defying description, shifting masses of tissue with too many eyes, too many mouths. They began to close in around us, moving with the patience of predators who know their prey is trapped. I raised the shotgun, knowing I had only 2 shells left. Not enough. Never enough. "What do you want?" I demanded, backing away slowly, trying to keep all of them in view. "Warmth," said the thing holding Jason. "Your warmth. Your skin, your memories." Jason made a strangled sound as the discoloration reached his shoulder, spreading across his chest beneath his jacket. His eyes had begun to cloud over, taking on the same vacant look the real Mira must have had before. Before what? Had they consumed her? Transformed her? The stories weren't clear on what happened to the Nantina's victims. "The real Mira," I said, stalling for time, hoping desperately for the sound of helicopter blades. "Where is she?" The creature laughed, a sound like ice cracking on the lake. "Here," it said, touching Mira's chest with its free hand. "Parts of her. The rest is scattered among us. We take what we need." Jason was changing before my eyes, his movements becoming jerky, mechanical. The clouding in his eyes had spread, leaving them milky white. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for water. "Let him go," I pleaded, though I knew it was futile. "Take me instead." The circle of creatures paused, as if actually considering my offer. The one holding Jason tilted Mira's head at an impossible angle. "You would trade? Willingly?" "Yes," I said, lowering the shotgun slightly. "If you release him." It seemed to confer with the others, a series of clicking sounds passing between them. Then it turned back to me. Come closer, Ahanu. Let us touch you. I took a single step forward, the shotgun now held loosely at my side. Jason's transformation continued, his skin taking on the same mottled appearance as his arm. I needed to act quickly. First, release him, I insisted. The creature hesitated, then slowly uncurled Mira's fingers from Jason's hand. He remained standing, swaying slightly, but no longer physically connected to the thing. That was all I needed. In one fluid motion, I raised the shotgun and fired directly at the creature's chest. The blast tore through Mira's form, revealing the writhing mass beneath. Before the others could react, I grabbed Jason's arm and ran, dragging him with me toward the frozen lake. The ice would be dangerous, but it was our only chance. The creatures pursued, their movements unnaturally fast despite their shambling appearances. Jason stumbled beside me, his movements uncoordinated but still somehow following my lead. We reached the lake's edge and I pulled him onto the ice. It creaked ominously beneath our weight, but held. Behind us, the creatures hesitated at the shoreline. They don't like the ice, I realized aloud. They can't cross water. It was a detail from the old stories I'd almost forgotten. The Nantina avoided crossing running water or ice. Something about their nature found it repellent. We stumbled further onto the frozen lake, the ice groaning beneath us. Jason moved like a puppet with half its strings cut, but he was still following me. I didn't know how much of him remained inside that changing body, but I had to believe something did. Stay with me, I urged him, keeping my voice low as we put distance between ourselves and the shore. Fight it, Jason. Whatever's happening to you, fight it. He made a gurgling sound, his clouded eyes focusing on me briefly before rolling back in his head. The mottled pattern had spread across his face now, pulsing beneath his skin like something alive and separate from him. At the shoreline, the creatures paced back and forth, their movements becoming increasingly agitated. The one wearing Mira's form stood at the center, watching us with calculated patience. It raised a hand toward us, and suddenly the ice beneath our feet shuddered. Cracks spiderwebbed outward from where we stood, the sound of splitting ice echoing across the lake. They're breaking the ice, I realized with horror. Not by stepping on it, but somehow affecting it from a distance. We needed to move faster to reach the far shore before the ice gave way. I pulled Jason forward, but his movements were becoming less coordinated with each passing second. The helicopter. Where was the helicopter? It should have arrived by now. As if in answer to my thoughts, I heard it. The distant thrum of rotors approaching from the south. Real this time, not the mimicry from before. The creatures heard it too. Their movements became frenzied, and the assault on the ice intensified. Larger cracks formed, water beginning to seep through. Just a little further, I told Jason, though I wasn't sure he could understand me anymore. Half his face had transformed, the skin bubbling and shifting like something trying to escape. We were 3/4 of the way across the lake when the ice finally gave way beneath us. I plunged into the frigid water, the cold so intense it felt like fire. Jason fell in beside me, disappearing beneath the surface immediately. I fought against the paralyzing cold, diving after him. Beneath the ice, the water was eerily clear, illuminated by the afternoon sun filtering through. I could see Jason sinking, his body contorting unnaturally. As I swam toward him, something miraculous happened. The mottled pattern on his skin began to slow off, dissolving into the water like ink. Whatever had been taking him over couldn't survive the freezing water. I grabbed his jacket and kicked for the surface, finding a gap in the broken ice. Gasping for air, I pulled Jason up beside me. His eyes were closed, his body limp, but the transformation had stopped. The clouding in his eyes was receding, his skin returning to its normal color where the water touched it. The helicopter was visible now, approaching rapidly. On the far shore, I could see park rangers emerging from the tree line, waving signals, but we weren't safe yet. The creatures remained on the near shore, and the ice around us was breaking apart rapidly. We wouldn't survive long in the freezing water. Hypothermia would claim us in minutes. I began swimming, pulling Jason with me toward the intact ice closer to the far shore. My limbs grew heavier with each stroke, numbness spreading through my extremities. The helicopter hovered overhead, a rescue line dropping toward us. I raised one arm weakly, trying to signal them. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sensation of being lifted from the water, Jason's cold body beside mine, and the creatures on the distant shore withdrawing into the forest as the helicopter's searchlight swept over them. I woke in a hospital bed 3 days later. Severe hypothermia, the doctor said. I was lucky to be alive. Jason had survived too, though he remained in intensive care, his condition critical but stable. When I was strong enough to speak, the search and rescue team came to debrief me. I told them about the hikers getting stranded, about Mira's injury and her disappearance from the cabin. I described the storm, the cold, our desperate attempt to cross the lake when we thought we saw help on the other side. I didn't tell them about the creatures, about the things that wore human forms and spoke with stolen voices, about what had nearly happened to Jason before the lake water washed it away. They found my cabin destroyed, not by fire or storm, but torn apart from the inside out, as if something had methodically dismantled it piece by piece. They found no trace of Mira anywhere. The official report cited animal attack, possibly wolves or bears, combined with weather exposure and hallucinations from hypothermia. Case closed. 2 weeks later, I was discharged from the hospital. Jason remained unconscious, the doctors puzzled by his condition. His vitals were stable, but he wouldn't wake up. Tests showed unusual brain activity, patterns they couldn't explain. I visited him the day before I left town. Sitting beside his hospital bed, I studied his face for any sign of the transformation I'd witnessed. His skin was normal, if pale. No mottling, no strange movement beneath the surface. But as I watched, his eyes opened briefly. They were clear, focused, and terrified. His lips moved, forming words without sound. I leaned closer to hear. "They're still here," he whispered. Inside, waiting, his eyes rolled back and he fell unconscious again. I left Alaska the next day, left my job, my cabin, everything. The medical bills my father had accumulated were nothing compared to what was waiting for me in those woods. Sometimes, in my dreams, I return to Mirror Lake. I see the creatures emerging from the trees, wearing faces I recognize, Mira's, Jason's, now even my own. They call to me with familiar voices, inviting me back to the cold and the dark. And sometimes, when I pass a reflective surface, a window, a mirror, a still pond, I catch a glimpse of something moving beneath my skin, something that doesn't belong there. Something patient and ancient, biding its time. The Denena elders have another name for the Nantina. They call them the patient ones. Creatures that can wait decades, centuries for their prey. They say that once the Nantina have found you, marked you, they never truly let you go. I left Alaska, but I know the truth now. You don't escape the skinwalkers. You just carry them with you, beneath your skin, into the warm places of the world, waiting for winter to come again. My name is Ahanu Blackwater, and for 15 years I've called the wilderness of Denali National Park my home. The Athabascan elders say my name means he laughs, though I haven't done much of that lately. Most days, it's just me, my thoughts, and 6 million acres of the most beautiful and unforgiving land you'll ever see. I took this ranger position after my wife Sarah died. Cancer took her quick, 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. The medical bills left me drowning in debt with nothing but memories and a house in Anchorage that felt too empty, too haunted by what we'd planned together. When the Park Service posting appeared, it seemed like fate. Isolation was what I craved, and Denali had it in spades. My cabin sits at the edge of Mirror Lake, a small, pristine body of water surrounded by dense pine forest that stretches endlessly in all directions. It's simple: 1 bedroom, a kitchen/living area, and a small bathroom with temperamental plumbing. The electricity comes from solar panels and a generator for emergencies. In winter, the wood stove is the difference between life and death when temperatures drop to 40 below. Most people can't handle the solitude. My supervisor in Anchorage runs through seasonal rangers like water, young idealists who arrive dreaming of some Instagram wilderness fantasy and leave broken by the reality of isolation. But for me, the quiet has been healing. I track wildlife movements, maintain trails, and occasionally rescue hikers who've underestimated the Alaskan wilderness. Until 3 weeks ago, I would have told you I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me: grizzlies, wolves, moose, hypothermia, avalanches. I'd tell you the greatest dangers in Alaska were the elements and your own poor decisions. I was wrong. It started with tracks around my cabin. Not animal, not human, but something in between. 5-toed impressions, longer than a man's foot but narrower, with what looked like claws extending from each digit. I've spent my life reading the stories written in mud and snow, but these made no sense. Then came the noises. Nights in the wilderness have their own soundtrack. The wind through pines, wolves in the distance, the occasional cry of a loon on the lake. But what began haunting the perimeter of my clearing after dark wasn't any Alaskan creature I recognized. It sounded like someone trying to mimic a human voice but not quite managing it. Like hearing your name called by someone who's only heard it described, but never spoken. Ahanu. I told myself it was just the wind, just my mind playing tricks after too many solitary years. I'd been alone too long, that's all. Isolation does things to a person's mind, creates patterns from randomness. But last night, as a storm front pushed across the mountains, I saw it. I was checking the generator when movement caught my eye at the tree line. Standing perfectly still between two ancient pines was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, its proportions all wrong. In the fading twilight, I could make out antlers or branches extending from its head, and eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like a deer's, but too high off the ground, too aware. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we watched each other. Then it smiled, a too-wide grin that split its face unnaturally, and stepped backward into the trees, its movement jerky and wrong, like footage played in reverse. The locals in the nearest village, 80 miles south, have stories about creatures that walk between worlds. The Diné call them skinwalkers. Other tribes have different names, shapeshifters that were once human, who sacrificed their humanity for power. I never believed those stories, but as I sit here in my cabin, door locked and shotgun across my lap, listening to something circle my home, calling my name in a voice that's almost my own, I'm starting to think I should have paid more attention. Whatever's out there, it's watching, waiting, learning, and I'm afraid it's wearing the face of someone I used to know. The radio crackled with static at 6 a.m., jolting me from what little sleep I'd managed. I dozed off in my chair sometime before dawn, the shotgun still balanced across my knees. Outside, the world was silent, covered in the season's first dusting of snow. "Ranger Blackwater, come in. Over." The voice belonged to Jim Takota, my supervisor in the regional office. I grabbed the handset. "Blackwater here. Over. Got a situation, Ahanu. Missing hiker, last seen headed toward your sector 3 days ago. College kid, male 20, separated from his group. Name's Daniel Keller. They've been searching the South Ridge, but with this weather front moving in," I sighed. This happened every year. Unprepared hikers underestimating Denali. Usually we found them cold, scared, and humbled. Sometimes we found bodies, and occasionally we never found them at all. "I'll start sweeping the trails near Mirror Lake. Any last known coordinates?" Over. Jim rattled off the GPS position, about 10 miles southeast of my cabin. "Far off any maintained trail. Weather's turning bad, Ahanu. Forecast says the storm is accelerating. You might have 6 hours before it hits. Be careful out there." Over and out. I packed quickly. First aid kit, emergency shelter, extra layers, flares, GPS, satellite phone, 2 days rations. Force of habit made me reach for the shotgun before heading out, though I told myself it was for bear protection, nothing more. The forest felt different that morning. Normally the woods around Mirror Lake comfort me with their ancient presence. That day they felt watchful, tense, as if holding their breath. The fresh snow made tracking easier. About 5 miles in, I found boot prints matching the description of Keller's hiking boots. They meandered, sometimes doubling back, the pattern of someone increasingly disoriented. Classic signs of hypothermia setting in. I followed the trail until it disappeared at the edge of a small, nameless lake that locals called Whispering Waters. The Athabascan elders avoided this lake. They claimed it was thin place where the membrane between worlds stretched transparent. "Daniel," I called, my voice echoing across the water. "Daniel Keller." Only silence answered, broken by something splashing near the center of the lake. I scanned the surface and saw ripples expanding outward from a point about 50 yards offshore. That's when I noticed the cabin. It sat on the opposite shore, half hidden among the pines. I'd patrolled this area for 15 years and never seen any structure here. The Park Service had no record of any private holdings within 20 miles of this location, yet there it stood, a crude log structure, smoke curling from its chimney. I circled the lake, following the shore until I reached the cabin. It looked old. The logs weathered gray, moss growing between them. A single window reflected the cloudy sky, too dirty to see inside. "Hello?" I called, approaching cautiously. "Park Service. Anyone here?" The door creaked open an inch, revealing darkness beyond. "Daniel Keller? I'm Ranger Blackwater. Your friends reported you missing." A voice emerged from the darkness, young, male, shaking with cold or fear. "I got lost. She helped me, said you'd come." I pushed the door open wider. The interior was simple. A table, chair, small wood stove glowing with embers. Daniel sat hunched near the heat, wrapped in an old blanket. His face was pale, eyes unfocused. "Who helped you?" I asked, kneeling to check his vitals. His skin was cold, pulse weak but steady. "The old woman," he whispered. "She found me last night, brought me here. Said to wait for the man named Laughing Water. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. No one used the translation of my name. No one except Sarah, and she was long dead. Did she tell you her name? He nodded slowly. Sarah. She said she was Sarah Blackwater. My blood froze. That's impossible. Daniel looked at me with suddenly clearer eyes. She said you'd say that. She said to tell you that the thing in the woods isn't her. It just wears her face sometimes. He swallowed hard. She said you need to leave this place before dark. She can't protect you anymore. Outside, the wind had picked up, bending the pines. The storm was arriving earlier than predicted. We need to move now, I said, helping him to his feet. Can you walk? He nodded, shrugging off the blanket. That's when I saw the marks on his ankle. 5 long scratches like claws had dragged across his skin. What happened to your leg? It tried to drag me into the lake last night, he whispered. Before she stopped it, as we stepped outside, I glanced back at the cabin. For a brief, disorienting moment, I thought I saw a figure watching us through the window. A woman's face, familiar and beloved. Then the wind gusted, and when I looked again, there was nothing there but my own reflection. The storm hit faster than I expected, visibility dropping to mere feet as snow whipped horizontally through the trees. Daniel stumbled alongside me, his condition deteriorating despite the emergency blanket I'd wrapped around him. We'd never make it back to my cabin before nightfall. Not in this weather, not with him fading. There's a ranger shelter about a mile north, I shouted over the wind. We need to get there before dark. Daniel nodded weakly, his eyes constantly darting to the surrounding forest. It's following us, he murmured. I can feel it watching. I kept my expression neutral while tightening my grip on the shotgun. The emergency shelter was little more than a glorified shack, a 10-by-10 structure with bunks, a wood stove, and supplies for stranded hikers or rangers caught in sudden weather. But it had 4 walls and a door that locked, which right now seemed like paradise. The wind carried sounds that played tricks on the mind. Whispers just below comprehension, voices calling from impossible distances. Twice I spun around, certain someone was directly behind us, only to find empty air swirling with snow. We reached the shelter as the last gray light faded from the sky. I fumbled with frozen fingers to unlock the padlock, practically shoving Daniel inside once the door swung open. Working quickly, I started a fire in the small stove, while Daniel collapsed onto one of the bunks. The shelter warmed quickly, and I set about treating him for hypothermia and examining the strange wounds on his ankle. The scratches were deep, showing early signs of infection. I cleaned them as best I could with the first aid kit, but something about them seemed wrong. The edges too precise, the pattern deliberate, almost like symbols. Tell me exactly what happened, I said, bandaging his leg. How did you get separated from your group? Daniel stared at the ceiling. We were hiking the Savage Alpine Trail. I stopped to take pictures of a moose and fell behind. By the time I finished, they were gone. I tried to catch up, but took a wrong turn somewhere. He swallowed. Night fell. I had a flashlight, but the batteries died. That's when I started hearing it. Hearing what? Someone calling my name. I thought it was my friends at first, so I followed the voice. It led me deeper into the woods, away from the trail. It sounded wrong somehow, like someone learning to speak. My hands stilled. What happened then? I realized I was being led somewhere I shouldn't go, so I stopped following. That's when it got angry. He pulled back the bandage to show me the marks. It grabbed me from behind, dragged me toward that lake. I was half underwater when the old woman appeared. She scared it off, somehow, took me to that cabin. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shelter's windows. Something scraped against the outer wall. Maybe a branch, maybe not. The woman who helped you, I said carefully. What did she look like? Old, native gray hair in a long braid. She had kind eyes. He hesitated. She knew things about you, said you came here running from grief, but you ran right into something worse. His gaze met mine. She said your wife's been trying to warn you for years, but you never listen. The fire popped loudly in the stove, sending sparks up the chimney. Daniel finally asked the question I'd been dreading. Is it true? Was your wife named Sarah? I stood abruptly, moving to check the windows, making sure they were secure. My wife died 10 years ago in Anchorage. Whatever you met, it wasn't her. But, get some rest. I cut him off. We'll head out at first light if the storm breaks. Daniel fell silent, watching me with a new weariness. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, his breathing deepening into sleep. I sat by the door with the shotgun across my lap, listening to the storm. In the howling wind, I could almost make out words. Almost, but not quite. Around midnight, the scratching started. Gentle at first, like curious fingernails testing the door's strength. Then harder, more insistent, moving methodically around the shelter's perimeter, testing each wall, each window. From outside came a voice that froze my blood. "Ahanu, let me in. It's so cold out here," Sarah's voice. Perfect in every detail. The slight Athabascan accent she'd inherited from her mother. The way she'd always drawn out the second syllable of my name. "You know it's me, don't you? Let me in, husband. Let me see you." I gripped the shotgun tighter, knuckles white. "You're not her." A pause. Then laughter. Sarah's laugh. But wrong somehow. Stretched too long, too hollow. "You always were stubborn," the voice said. No longer entirely Sarah's, but something using her voice like an ill-fitting mask. "The old woman can't protect you forever. She's fading, Ahanu. Soon there will be nothing left of her but what I choose to keep." "What are you?" I whispered. Another laugh. "I'm everything that's been forgotten in these woods. I'm what was here before your kind came with your maps and names and boundaries." The scratching intensified, becoming a frantic scrabbling at every surface of the shelter simultaneously, as if dozens of clawed hands were trying to dig through the walls. "I'll wear her face when I take you," the voice promised. "You'll follow me into the deep places thinking you're following your beloved. Isn't that what you want, to be with her again?" From his bunk, Daniel whimpered in his sleep, turning restlessly. The scratching abruptly stopped, and I felt the creature's attention shift. "The boy is marked," it said, voice now directly outside the window near Daniel's bunk. "He belongs to me already." I moved to stand between the window and Daniel's sleeping form. "Leave him alone." "Such protection," it mocked. "But who protects you, Ranger? You're alone here. You've always been alone." A sudden silence fell, more terrifying than the scratching or the voice. I stood motionless, listening, the shotgun ready. Then, impossibly, I heard Sarah's voice again, but different this time, not from outside but seemingly from the air itself, faint as a memory. "Dawn comes, my love. It cannot stay in the light. Remember what my grandmother taught us." The first gray light of dawn was indeed creeping through the windows. The storm had passed during the night, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. As the sun broke over the distant mountains, I finally heard it retreat. Branches breaking, snow crunching under heavy steps moving away from the shelter, back toward the depths of the forest, back toward Mirror Lake, back toward my cabin. Home. We made it back to my cabin by midday. Daniel was stronger after a night's rest, though the wounds on his ankle had taken on a concerning blackish tinge despite the antibiotics I'd given him. Throughout our hike, he kept looking over his shoulder, his eyes searching the tree line. "It's still out there," he said quietly as we approached Mirror Lake. "I can feel it watching." I nodded, scanning the forest's edge. Nothing moved among the pines, but the woods felt charged with malevolent attention. My cabin looked untouched, sitting peacefully at the lake's edge. Yet something felt different, disturbed, like returning home to find furniture shifted inches from where you left it. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, but colder, as if the door had been left open for hours. I quickly built a fire while radioing Jim Dakota to report finding Daniel. The connection was poor, static cutting through my transmission. "Need medical evacuation," I said. "Victim has unusual wounds, possible infection." Jim's voice broke through. "Helicopter. Morning weather permits." The transmission died completely. I turned to Daniel, who had settled on my couch, staring out the window at the lake. "Helicopter can't come until morning at the earliest," I told him. "We'll need to manage another night here." He nodded without turning from the window. "She's out there," he said. "Not the thing. The old woman. She's watching the lake." I moved to stand beside him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Mirror Lake's surface. At first I saw nothing unusual, then movement at the water's edge. A figure stood half concealed by pines on the far shore, too distant to make out clearly. "Stay here," I said, grabbing my binoculars and shotgun. "Lock the door behind me." The figure hadn't moved by the time I circled to the eastern shore. Through the binoculars, I could make out an elderly native woman in traditional Athabascan clothing, her gray hair in a long braid. She stood motionless, staring across the water at my cabin. As I approached, she turned to face me. Something about her seemed ephemeral, as if she were partially transparent in the slanting sunlight, yet her eyes were sharp, alert, and undeniably familiar. "You look like her," I said, stopping several yards away. "Like Sarah's grandmother." The woman nodded. "Nimi Poo blood runs strong. My granddaughter had my eyes. She spoke with the same cadence as grandmother Catherine, who had taught Sarah the old ways before passing when Sarah was 16. "Who are you?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "You know who I am, Ahanu Blackwater. The question is what I am now." She gestured toward the lake. "I died 15 years ago, but something keeps me here. The same thing that keeps parts of your Sarah here." "Sarah died in Anchorage," I said automatically. The woman, Catherine, shook her head. "Her body died there, but her spirit, parts of it came looking for you. These woods trap pieces of those who are loved. It feeds on that connection." "What does? What's out there?" Catherine's expression darkened. "The people called it Chaos, the devours from within. It was old when the first humans came to these mountains." She pointed toward the center of the lake. "It sleeps beneath the water, dreaming hungry dreams. It reaches out, finding those who are alone, vulnerable. It learns their desires, their losses. Then it wears those shapes to lure them closer." I thought of the tracks I'd found, the voice calling my name, Sarah's face in the darkness. "The boy is marked," Catherine continued. "It wants him badly, but it wants you more. 10 years you've lived here, feeding it with your grief, your loneliness. It's patient, Ahanu. It's been tasting you little by little." "How do I stop it?" "You don't. You leave. Take the boy and never return to these mountains." I shook my head. "This is my home." "No," she said sharply. "This was never your home. This was where you came to die slowly, to punish yourself for surviving." Her eyes softened. "Sarah would not want this half-life for you. If what you say is true, then part of her is here. Fragments only. Echoes. Not enough." Catherine looked toward the setting sun. "Night comes. I can't remain when darkness falls. It grows stronger then." "Wait," I said as she turned to go. "How do I protect Daniel until the helicopter comes?" She paused. "Salt the thresholds. Keep fire burning. And remember, no matter what you see, no matter what you hear, it is not your Sarah. What's left of her is trying to warn you, not lure you. And if it comes for us..." Catherine's form seemed to waver, becoming more transparent as the sun dipped below the mountains. "If it comes, remember what I taught Sarah about spirits that hunt. They can only take what is freely given." Her voice grew fainter. "It will try to make you choose to follow. That's the only way it can claim you." With those words, she faded entirely, leaving me alone on the shoreline as darkness crept across the water's surface. By the time I returned to the cabin, night had fallen completely. Daniel had locked himself in as instructed, and I found him huddled near the fireplace. "Did you see her?" he asked as I entered, quickly relocking the door behind me. "Yes." I moved through the cabin, salting the windowsills and doorway as Catherine had instructed. "We need to make it through tonight. Helicopter comes in the morning." Daniel nodded, then winced, pulling up his pant leg. The wounds had spread, black tendrils extending up his calf. "It's getting worse," he said. "I can feel it, pulling at me like it's calling me back to the lake." I examined the infection. The pattern of the wounds had definitely changed, forming symbols I almost recognized, similar to Athabascan protective sigils but twisted, inverted. "We'll get you to a hospital tomorrow," I promised, though I was no longer certain modern medicine could address what was happening to him. As the night deepened, the forest around us grew unnaturally quiet. No wind, no animal sounds, not even the usual creaking of the cabin's timbers. Just absolute silence, as if the world were holding its breath. Then it began. First came the scratching, at the windows, the walls, the roof. Then voices, multiple voices calling from the darkness. Daniel's friends calling his name. My former colleagues from Anchorage. My parents, long dead. And Sarah. Always Sarah. "Ahanu, please. I'm cold. Let me in." I sat with my back against the door, shotgun ready, as Daniel curled into himself on the couch, hands over his ears. "Don't listen," I told him. "No matter what, don't answer." The voices grew more desperate, more pleading. The scratching became pounding, the whole cabin shaking with the force of it. "The pain is getting worse," Daniel gasped around midnight, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. "It's pulling me. I can't fight it much longer." I checked his leg again. The black veins had spread to his knee, pulsing with a rhythm like a heartbeat. His skin burned with fever. Outside, the assault on the cabin intensified. Something heavy threw itself against the door, making the wood creak ominously. "What do we do?" Daniel whispered. I thought of Catherine's words. "They can only take what is freely given." "We wait for dawn," I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. "We give nothing freely." But as the night wore on, I began to wonder if we would see the morning. 3 hours before dawn, the pounding stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the cacophony that had preceded it. Daniel had fallen into a fever dream, murmuring incoherently, his leg now completely black to mid-thigh. I moved to the window, carefully peering out. The night was clear, stars reflecting on Mirror Lake's still surface. Nothing moved in the darkness. Then I saw her. Sarah stood at the water's edge, exactly as I remembered her. Not as she'd been at the end, hollowed by illness, but vibrant, healthy, her long black hair loose around her shoulders. She wore her favorite blue dress, the one she'd worn on our last anniversary before the diagnosis. She was looking directly at the cabin. At me. It's not her, I whispered to myself. Remember what Catherine said. Yet even as I spoke the words, doubt crept in. What if Catherine was wrong? What if some part of Sarah had truly remained, waiting all these years for me to see her? Sarah raised her hand, beckoning. Behind me, Daniel cried out in pain. When I turned, he was sitting upright, eyes wide and unfocused. It's calling me, he gasped. It's in my head now. It says it will stop the pain if I go to the lake. I rushed to his side, checking his pulse. Racing, erratic. Stay with me, Daniel. The helicopter will be here in a few hours. I can't. His eyes rolled back, body convulsing. It's showing me things. My family, it says they're waiting at the lake. I grabbed his shoulders. It's lying. Whatever it's showing you, it's not real. His eyes refocused briefly. Then why are you looking at her? He whispered. I can see her in your mind too, your wife, standing by the water. I flinched as if struck. Was I somehow connected to the entity too? Had 10 years of isolation made me vulnerable to its influence? A soft tapping came at the window. Gentle, almost hesitant. Not the violent pounding from before. Ahanu. Sarah's voice so achingly familiar it brought tears to my eyes. I don't have much time. Please just look at me, just once more. Against every instinct, I turned. She stood directly outside the window now, palm pressed against the glass. Her eyes held such sadness, such longing. I've been trying to reach you for so long, she said. But it keeps twisting my words, using my face. How do I know it's really you? I asked, voice breaking. She smiled, that crooked smile I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. Remember what I told you the night before I died? That I'd find a way back to you even if I had to fight the spirit world to do it. I did remember. We'd been in the hospital, the monitors beeping steadily. Both of us knowing the end was near. Let me help you, she continued. The boy is nearly gone, but you can still save him. Open the door, and I'll show you how. I found myself moving toward the door, hand reaching for the lock. Don't, Daniel croaked from the couch. Please, something's wrong. I hesitated, looking back at him. The black veins had spread visibly in just the few minutes I'd been distracted, now reaching his hip. There's no time, Sarah urged. He'll be gone by dawn. My hand rested on the lock. One simple turn, and I could see her again, hold her again. All I had to do was open the door. A flash of memory stopped me. Not of Sarah, but of her grandmother Catherine, teaching us about Athabascan spirits during one of our visits to her village. The most dangerous ones, she'd said, are those that know exactly what you want. They'll offer it freely, asking only something small in return. Just open the door, just step outside, just follow me a little way. I looked at Sarah, really looked, and noticed what I'd missed before. Her feet weren't touching the ground, she hovered an inch above the snow, and her shadow, it stretched behind her unnaturally, not matching her form at all, but extending toward the lake like a tether. You're not her, I said, stepping back from the door. Sarah's face contorted with rage, transforming momentarily into something inhuman before settling back into her features. I'm all that's left of her, the thing said, Sarah's voice now undercut with something ancient and cold. Parts of her are in me now. I've consumed what remained of her spirit. Open the door, and you can join her. No, the thing wearing Sarah's face pressed harder against the window, the glass frosting around her palm. Then I'll take the boy first. He's already more mine than his own. Daniel screamed, his back arching as the black veins pulsed visibly beneath his skin. I rushed to his side, pinning him down as he thrashed. Fight it, Daniel, I shouted. Don't listen to what it's showing you. My family, he gasped. They're drowning in the lake. I have to help them. Outside, the thing laughed with Sarah's voice. He's seeing what I want him to see, just as you are. It pressed its face against the glass, breath fogging the window. The boy will die before dawn. His life for yours, Ahanu. Open the door and I'll release him. I looked at Daniel, now barely conscious, skin gray except for the black veins spreading across his torso. Then at the thing pretending to be my wife, its hungry eyes watching from Sarah's beloved face. What guarantee do I have? I asked, its smile widened too far for a human face. My word, I've waited 10 years for you, Ahanu. I can wait longer for the boy. I stood slowly. If I come outside, you'll let him go? The infection will recede? Yes. And you'll take me instead? Yes. It seemed to shimmer with anticipation. Just step outside. Just follow me to the lake. It will be quick. I moved to the door, hand on the lock. Behind me, Daniel's breathing had grown shallow, labored. No. He managed to whisper. Don't. I turned the lock, hearing it click. The thing's eagerness was palpable now, pressing harder against the window. Yes, it hissed. Come to me, husband. I opened the door a crack, just enough to speak through. I need to hear you say it clearly. If I come with you, Daniel will be healed and free to leave when the helicopter arrives. It nodded Sarah's head, eyes gleaming. He will be healed. He will leave these mountains. I opened the door wider. Then I'll come. The thing reached for me with Sarah's hand, and I threw a handful of salt directly into its face. It shrieked, recoiling, Sarah's features melting like wax to reveal something ancient and terrible beneath. All angles and teeth and too many eyes. It stumbled backward as I slammed the door shut, locking it again. The assault on the cabin resumed instantly, no longer scratching or pounding, but a full onslaught, as if dozens of bodies were throwing themselves against every surface. Windows cracked but held. The door frame splintered at the edges. On the couch, Daniel had gone still, barely breathing. Hold on, I told him, though I wasn't sure he could hear me. Just until dawn. The attack continued for what felt like eternity, the cabin groaning under the assault. I moved from window to window again, reinforcing with whatever furniture I could drag into place, and then, almost imperceptibly at first, the quality of darkness outside began to change. Dawn was coming. The entities sensed it too. Its attacks grew more frenzied, more desperate. The thing with Sarah's face appeared at every window in turn, alternating between her form and something too horrific to comprehend. You could have saved him, it snarled when it became clear the cabin would hold. His death is on your hands. I said nothing, watching as the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon. The assault weakened with each passing minute, the pounding becoming scratching again, then simply a desperate scrabbling, and finally silence. The first direct sunlight touched the cabin as I moved to check on Daniel. To my shock, he was breathing more easily, some color returning to his face. The black veins had stopped spreading, though they still marked his skin from ankle to chest. Daniel, I called softly. Can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, confused but aware. What happened? Dawn came, I said simply. We made it through the night. He looked down at his leg. It stopped hurting, but it's still there, inside me. I can feel it, waiting. From far off came the distant thrum of helicopter blades. I helped Daniel to his feet, supporting him as we moved to the door. Outside, the morning was bright and clear. No sign of the previous night's visitation except for chaotic tracks in the snow, not human, not animal, leading back to the lake's edge. As we waited for the helicopter to land in the clearing beside the cabin, Daniel gazed across Mirror Lake. Will it come back tonight? He asked. I followed his gaze to where the water lay innocent and serene in the morning light. Yes, but we won't be here. And after that? Will it follow us? I thought of the black veins still visible beneath his skin. Of the 10 years I'd spent feeding this thing with my grief and isolation. I don't know, I answered honestly, but we'll face it together. The helicopter appeared over the tree line, descending toward us. As it landed, I took one last look at the cabin that had been my refuge in prison for a decade. On the far shore stood two figures, Catherine and, beside her, the true echo of my Sarah, both watching us with solemn eyes. They raised their hands in farewell as we boarded the helicopter. I knew then that I would return. Not to stay, but to end what I had unwittingly begun. Something ancient and hungry lived beneath Mirror Lake, and it had tasted both Daniel and me. It would be waiting, but so would I. 3 months have passed since I left Denali. I now live in a small apartment in Anchorage. The city sounds still jarring after so many years of wilderness silence. My resignation from the Park Service was accepted without question. Apparently, my supervisor had been expecting it for years. Daniel recovered, at least physically. The black veins faded to faint scars running from ankle to chest, visible only in certain light. The doctors had no explanation, classifying it as an unknown dermatological reaction to environmental toxins. But Daniel and I know better. We keep in touch, bound by our experience. He's back at college now, studying folklore and indigenous belief systems. Sometimes he calls in the middle of the night, voice shaking, to tell me about his dreams, of dark water, of things moving beneath the surface. Calling his name, I tell him about mine too, because it isn't finished with us. Not by a long shot. I've spent these months researching, gathering information from elders of various Alaska Native tribes. Few will speak openly about what they call kahes, the devourers from within. Those who do share only warnings, never solutions. It's been known by many names across cultures, skinwalker to some, wendigo to others. Always hungry, always patient, always learning. The Athabascan elders who finally agreed to meet with me confirmed what I had already suspected. The creature at Mirror Lake is ancient, one of the first hungry ones who came before humans walked the earth. It doesn't just consume flesh, it devours essence, identity, leaving hollow shells that it can wear like clothing. Why did it focus on me? I asked an elder named Thomas Begay, whose grandmother had known Catherine. He studied me with eyes that had seen more than I could comprehend. Grief opens doors, he said simply. 10 years alone with your pain, you might as well have been sending out invitations. And Daniel, young, alone, vulnerable, easy prey. He leaned forward. But there's something you're not asking, Ranger Blackwater. What's that? Why it kept parts of your wife? Why it didn't simply consume her completely? The question had haunted me. If the creature could absorb the spirits of the dead, why had it preserved enough of Sarah for her to try warning me? Thomas nodded at my expression because sometimes when the connection is strong enough, the spirit resists. Your wife's love for you was stronger than its hunger. That's rare, and it makes this entity more dangerous. It will want to finish what it started. I showed him the journal I'd been keeping. Sketches of symbols from Daniel's wounds, notes from our experience, descriptions of the creature in all its forms. I'm going back, I told him. When winter breaks. He wasn't surprised. To kill it, if I can. Thomas shook his head. Such things cannot be killed, not in the way you're thinking. They can be bound, sometimes, weakened, never destroyed completely. Then I'll bind it. He studied me for a long moment. You carry something it wants, something it's tasted but couldn't fully consume. It will be waiting, I know. Now spring approaches, the days growing longer. My gear is packed, my research complete. Daniel insists on coming with me despite my objections. It marked me too, he says. I have as much right to face it as you do. I can't argue with that. Tomorrow we return to Mirror Lake, to the cabin that was my home for 10 years. Not as prey this time, but as hunters. We carry with us the knowledge of generations, rituals, and bindings from cultures across Alaska, weapons both physical and spiritual. I don't know if we'll succeed. The entity beneath the lake has had countless years to perfect its hunger. It's learned so much about humanity, our weaknesses, our desires, the ways we can be broken and consumed. But it's learned something else too, something it perhaps didn't intend, how we fight for those we love. How some connections transcend death itself. As I write these final words, I can feel it reaching across the miles between Anchorage and Denali, searching for me in dreams. Sometimes, in the moments between waking and sleep, I hear Sarah's voice warning me, feel Catherine's presence standing guard. Other times, I hear the other voice, the thing from the lake, still wearing my wife's face like a mask. Come home, Ahanu, it whispers. I'm waiting for you. And I whisper back, I know, I'm counting on it. If someone finds this journal and I don't return, know this. There are places in the wilderness where ancient things still dwell, things that hunger for more than flesh, things that learn and adapt and wait. If you find yourself alone in the deep woods, listening to a voice that sounds almost but not quite like someone you've lost, do not answer. Do not follow. And if you come across a cabin by a lake called Mirror with tracks that are neither human nor animal leading to its door, leave it undisturbed. Whatever you do, don't go in. I won't be there anymore.